Good morning, good afternoon, good evening. Have a good day wherever you are in the many places around the world where our 100 registered participants come from. I'm assuming the number of attendees will grow as we proceed with a 3.5-hour webinar. Welcome to the third CoNGO Global Thematic webinar on substantive issues. This webinar is focused on gender justice, youth, and intra and generational justice and solidarity for future generations. I'm excited to hear our panelists and their views on the topics, including that of the introductions by our moderators. And before I forget, just to make sure, go to interpretation button if you want to hear this webinar in Arabic, French, or Spanish. And I already want to thank our language interpreters for their valuable services. It is a commitment of CoNGO to linguistic justice and linguistic diversity. And it has to do with access to the texts and to the words that we say. And having as many languages is the key to greater understanding. One that the world is in short supply, and therefore we want to prosper that diversity. And just like the previous webinars, webinar 1 was on social justice. It dealt with migration justice, racial justice, and health justice. Webinar 2 was on pursuing global justice and solidarity, and we focused that time on how to realize Agenda 2030, sustainable development, and humanitarian action. This webinar, this time, focuses on gender justice, youth, and inter and intragenerational justice and solidarity for future generations. CoNGO's principal mandate is to ensure that NGOs accredited to the UN have all the necessary access to the premises and promises of the United Nations. By premises, I mean the physical spaces for consultations, collaboration, and cooperation. By promises, I mean the substantive issues that pursue the pillars of the UN system: human dignity and human rights, peace and security, sustainable development and progress, and harmonious relations of nations under the rule of law. Intrinsic to these pillars is the promise of the UN to foster peace so that the scourge of war visits us no longer in our lifetimes. Unfortunately, since the UN was born, more wars have been launched and more lethal weapons, including more sophisticated nuclear weapons, have been developed and produced. But why mention war today in this webinar? Because if there is an existential threat to the future of both present and future generations, it is this more death-dealing and life-crushing wars that the multilateral system has promised to no longer visit us and yet failed miserably to prevent. Instead, even more wars have been launched. The preoccupation with war has sidelined overarching concerns like gender justice and the integrity of the ecological system. More money is being given to wars and spent on conflicts than in addressing gender justice and the hopes of our children and our young people, not the least, funding for their education. The present does not augur well for today's children and youth, as certainly imperils the human right to a just, peaceable, and sustainable future for the generations yet to be born. Human security and planetary sustainability are at stake. If national and multilateral budgets are a statement of our moral bearings, we are in a deep moral deficit today. And it has to be reversed if we are to achieve fundamental transformations that ensure human security and planetary integrity. Indeed, our present and future. The summit of the future must be a summit of fundamental transformations. I hasten to add that our common and shared agenda, as proffered by the Secretary General Antonio Guterres, is to recall the impetus that brought about the Millennium Development Goals, which is about eradicating hunger and eliminating poverty. All development goals that fail this first step fails the rest. It certainly will fail our children and our youth, both who are with us now and those who are yet to be born. The changes we seek today and must commit to putting any agenda for transformation in our collective life must move from promises to deliverables. That goes for the national and multilateral commitments written in the text of multilateral agreements, but short on practice. The UNSG recently expressed this concern. CoNGO's organizational mantra over the years since 2008 and antedates the discussion of the future at the UN. Our corporate theme says, defining the present and shaping the future. For this current term, and in the year of our 75th anniversary, we burdened ourselves with an added task. That is, to identify the things that make for change and change that we can commit to. Therefore, the overriding theme of the 6 global thematic webinars we have set to hold this year is defining the present, shaping the future, making change now. We must make the change now. This is what we endeavor to identify today at this webinar. We will define the present, yes. We will shape the future, we must, of course. But more urgent and pressing are the changes we are willing to make. We are making the change now, and that should be a big yes to all of us, for all of us. So what changes are we willing to make and do so that gender justice does not linger as empty word in national and multilateral texts, but comes alive and visible in our human and social relations? What changes are we willing to make and do so that intergenerational and intragenerational justice and solidarity become equally alive and visible and give hope to today's generation of children and youth and those in the future? Today's webinar is designed to weigh in on multilateral discussions at the UN related to the UNSG's Our Common Agenda, the Sustainable Development Goals Summit, the Summit of the Future, the New Peace Agenda, and so much more. This webinar fulfills CoNGO's fundamental mandate to provide its NGO members and the broader civil society access to the physical premises and the thematic fronts of the UN. This mandate is undoubtedly familiar to many of your organizations. This webinar seeks to amplify the voice and agency of civil society in their organized collectivities called NGOs. But what needs to be louder, because they're often absent, are young people's voices and agency. I hope you will find inspiration in the presentation of 11 young people on the panel today. That's more than 1/3 of our speakers list. Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to this 3rd global webinar of CoNGO. Let this webinar contribute to the effort of civil society to the lending of their expertise in the multilateral system, the UN in particular. In a time when the world is in surplus of fear and in deficit of hope, civil society, without fear and with boldness, must speak here and in the public square, no matter that public square is shrinking and democratic discourse is being threatened. So on with the webinar, brought to you by 10 co-sponsors and made possible with panelists, moderators, rapporteurs, staff, and planning team members who labored to produce this event today. Let us hear from our co-chairs of the anniversary of CoNGO give their greetings.
It is a great pleasure to be with you today, and I give a warm thank you to your leader, our leader, Levi Bautista, the president of the Conference of NGOs, for inviting me to be an honorary co-chair. I'm very pleased to do so and to connect with so many of you who care and work with and for the United Nations. I want to look back for just a moment in history to 1945, when the UN Charter was drafted in San Francisco. There were then about 100 observers, now called NGOs, who mostly sat at the edge of the room and listened. And just 3 years later, in 1948, as the UN was still seeking its permanent home, the Conference of NGO was founded. Fast forward to today, 75 years later, we gather again with different backgrounds, races, religions, nationalities, but joined in our shared vision of making a better world, of knowing that we can do more together than we can do alone, and knowing that the issues we care about connect us across borders, including human rights and social justice and development and peace and security and so much more. We know that diplomats play a key role, but they cannot succeed without wide public understanding and support. So here, we joined forces, we engaged with the UN and the decision-making process. So we mark 75 years of the Conference of NGOs. Let us mobilize and galvanize our Conference of NGO constituency and celebrate this milestone of cooperation and interaction of civil society and the UN. And let us look to the future with hope and determination as we work ever more to make a better world. I'm honored to join you every step of the way. And on to you, Patrick.
Thank you, Gillian. It is my honor to be co-chair with you for the CoNGO 75th Anniversary Committee. It is with great pride to see the 75th anniversary celebration slated for the entire year of 2023, moving along so well. Over 1,000 NGO representatives joined CoNGO in the first of 6 global webinars focused on achieving social justice, especially racial justice, migration justice, and health justice. Since its founding in 1948, CoNGO has been a significant force in bringing to the United Nations an NGO force and voice to that agency. It has always done that with great distinction. Thank you.
Before we start with the keynote speeches, please look at the screen and pay attention to the ground rules for the webinar. So on with our keynote speeches. I am pleased to welcome to the webinar number 3, Jayatma Wickramanayake, the UN Secretary General's envoy on youth. I encourage, we will be screening for 15 seconds the bio of all our speakers, and in the produced version, you will be able to read more about them. In the interest of time and for more substantive discussion, we will project their bio.
Hello everyone, my name is Jayatma Wickramanayake and I am the United Nations Secretary General's Envoy on Youth. It is a great pleasure to address you at the 75th anniversary of the Conference of Non-Governmental Organizations in Consultative Relationship with the United Nations. I'm honored to join this milestone celebration and very much appreciate the central theme of today's webinar on intergenerational justice and solidarity for future generations. Just a few weeks ago, the United Nations Secretary General raised the urgency of the climate crisis and how we have moved from an era of global warming to global boiling. Extreme monsoons, global-wide heat waves, and increasing numbers of fires are some of the impacts of climate change that are seen and felt around the world, and hardest by those who we already consider amongst the most vulnerable. The Human Rights Council recognizes that the right to a clean, healthy, and sustainable environment is needed as a human right, and as such, the failure to address the irreversible impacts of climate crisis in our present time is not only a failure to respect a universal right for everyone, but also the rights of generations to come. Future generations are often defined as all those generations that do not yet exist, are yet to come, and who will eventually inherit this planet. And the current generation garners our best advocates to push for progress and accountability from policymakers to deliver their duties to the future. The responsibility to take future generations into account, therefore, does not begin in the future. It begins with all of us today, and young people play a central role in this effort. Although young people today are distinctively different from future generations, they have taken the task to fight for the future of people and the planet and for the future as their responsibility. But this task and this responsibility should not be solely on the shoulders of young people. Intergenerational solidarity is needed to support the efforts that young people have been leading in demanding climate action. Young people need to be meaningfully engaged and supported if we are to work together in solidarity to achieve our common goal for a better future. More importantly, the rights of young people in this context must be recognized, upheld, and fulfilled. To end my remarks, I wish to highlight once again the centrality of human rights in our efforts to bring intergenerational justice and solidarity for future generations. There is no better investment than in youth to ensure the achievement of this ambitious goal. It is my hope that through this convening, partnerships across all generations will be fostered, and the young people in today's conference will be able to leverage from this opportunity to collaborate further with all stakeholders to advocate for people today and for generations to come. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Ms. Jayatma Vikramanayake, for your timely, if urgent message at this webinar. I now call on Mr. Kim Wan-soo to speak next. Mr. Kim Wan-soo is Assistant Diplomat, a consummate international public servant, having held the rank of Undersecretary General, High Representative for Disarmament Affairs at the United Nations. But his foremost credential to me is that he is a civil society friend. Apparently, Global Academy for Civilization. Good to see you again, Kim Wan-soo. We were together in Korea last week, and we look forward to hearing from you.
Thank you. Good morning, New York. Good evening from Seoul. President Liberato Batista, Ms. Gillian Sorensen, Brigadier General Patrick Ria, distinguished panelists and guests. It's my great honor and pleasure to be invited to speak on the theme of intergenerational justice and solidarity. It's an essential factor to consider in resolving many of the global challenges we now face. Before addressing this important theme, I feel obliged to express my special gratitude. First of all, I'm extremely grateful to the co-chairs of the CoNGO's 75th anniversary webinar, Ms. Sorensen and Brigadier General Rea, for putting together this timely and much needed event. It's so great to see and hear Jillian again after I left New York some years ago. Next, I would like to recognize a good friend, also not old, but longtime friend, the President of CoNGO, Liberato Batista. I appreciate you having me here. I salute your efforts to make the voices of the young heard loud and clear by the international community. Last but not least, I thank all the distinguished guests and panelists from around the world for joining us this morning. Ladies and gentlemen, the whole humanity is facing complex global crises taking place on multiple levels and at the same time. This is unprecedented, not only in human history, but also in the much longer history of planet Earth, as these crises are not natural, but man-made. Over the last 10,000 years, human civilization has improved the quality of human life substantially, but it came with an increasingly unbearable cost to the Earth ecosystem. Now I'm afraid we are so close to the point of no return, or even worse, we may have already crossed it. The rising global average temperature, especially the threshold of 1.5 degrees Celsius, as my previous speaker just alluded to, and also many problems we are seeing these days. And as UN Secretary General Antonio Guterres said, global warming is not the right expression any longer and should be replaced by global boiling. And also other signs of the looming catastrophe are everywhere. Scientists even recently warned that fresh water from melting ice in the Arctic and Antarctica was weakening ocean currents. But this is particularly warning, given the possibility that North Atlantic currents may disappear by the middle of this century, even as early as 2027, even 4 years from now. This could potentially lead to Europe and North America freezing over, as bleakly depicted in the 2004 movie, The Day After Tomorrow. Unfortunately, things will only get worse from here. The current crisis is a symptom of excesses of human civilization, particularly industrial civilization. As such, what we are experiencing is a crisis of civilization. Yet, our response has been profoundly lacking. We as humanity have yet to take urgent collective action to get off the path we are now on. This inability to respond effectively to the perils facing us comes from two structural injustice inherent in the international system. First, less advanced economies will take the brunt of climate disasters, even though they have emitted far less than advanced ones. Second, younger generations have far greater stakes in the sustainable future of this planet than older ones, whereas their relative political power is very much limited. Unless we change the basic paradigm of industrial civilization, we cannot solve this problem. Time is running out. But we do not have a plan B because we do not have a planet B. Keeping our planet clean and healthy requires all government, civil society, and private sector leaders to work together. We must transcend our differences and acknowledge our common fate, because humanity stands at a crossroad of peace or collapse. With very little time in our hands, our future depends on whether we can work together. But the prospects for a quick turnaround are not good, because global governance is in great turmoil. Big powers are more intent on pursuing competition rather than cooperation. UN Security Council's inability to produce consensus exemplifies declining global governance. Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, global governance must be restored as a matter of urgency. Then, only then, can we restore the spirit of solidarity as one global family and work together toward one common future. For that, I count on the leadership of civil society leaders. NGOs have a special role to play in raising awareness among the public and pressuring governments to take action. Additionally, political leaders must be reminded of their responsibility to rise above narrow national and other vested interests and look to the common future of the whole humanity. We, the peoples of the world, must be reminded of our responsibility to transform our lifestyles that in ways that put the planet and the people front and center. Ladies and gentlemen, we are in deep trouble, but our future is still in our hands. It will be determined by the choices we make. That means we must make the right choice. We must keep our planet safe and secure for all generations, past, present, and future. There is no doubt this journey will be arduous, but I have hope. As an African proverb says, if we want to go far, we should go together. Divided, we will perish. Together, we can make it. Only together, we can do it. Thank you so much for your attention.
Thank you very much. Humanity is at a crossroads, you said, and I think the vista and breadth of issues that you face is enough to challenge us today for where lie those threats and where lie the hopes as well. And so thank you very much for your contribution. For the participants, we endeavor to have the full manuscript of our speakers, and we will try to have them published in the future. I now call on Hibak Osman, our next keynote speaker. Hibak, again, is a good friend and a member of the United Nations Women's Global Society Civil Society Advisory Group, and is the founder and chair of El Karam, and so much more. We'll keep for another 10 seconds her short bio, and you can screen that again in the course of her presentation. Hibak, you have the screen.
Thank you very much. First of all, I must thank you so much, Mr. Batista, for you and your office for always being there for the civil society and for the silent majority. Thank you very much, ladies and gentlemen, distinguished participants. I stand before you today with a sense of profound honor and privilege as we gather for CoNGO's thematic webinar and celebration of the 75 years of CoNGO. Our discussion centers on a matter of paramount importance, the pursuit of gender justice through a transformed multilateral approach. As we devolve into this topic, we must acknowledge that gender justice isn't just an isolated cause, it is interwoven with youth empowerment, intergenerational solidarity, and the prospects we offer for our future generations. This principle resonate deeply within my organization, Krama, and resonate equally with me. From the heart of Cairo, a city with history and diversity, I share my thoughts. Cairo stands as a symbol of a region that has grappled with challenges and opportunities. More than 55% of its population is under 30, representing a youth demographic that has been the driving force behind significant historical shifts. Not too long ago, our region experienced unrest on a fast scale. It was a time when the voices of the young resounded with discontent, fueled by the frustration with corruption, unemployment, and economic instability. The words of Martin Luther King, comes to mind. A riot is the language of the unheard. It exemplified as a massive protest erupted. The youth emerged as unstoppable force, demanding change that was impossible to ignore. Yet the unity forged through these revolutionary times also bore limitations. While the power of collective action was undeniable, it became evident that to achieve lasting transformation, unity needed to transcend opposition to the status quo. For these movements to deliver on their initial promise, a broader constituency for change was required. The issue of intergenerational engagement was brought into stark relief. During these times, many young leaders rejected pre-existing institutions, viewing them as insufficient in driving the change they sought. This lack of cross-generational collaboration and understanding hindered the potential impact of these revolutions. The critical lesson here is that sustainable change necessitates a collective approach. While youth inject boundless energy and innovative thinking, experience and wisdom offered by established activists provide a vital framework for effective change. An intergenerational approach bridges the gap, tapping into the creativity and determination of youth while benefiting from the insights and knowledge of those who have navigated the challenges of change before. Karama, the organization I represent, has scrambled with this dynamic. We recognize that the dismissive attitudes that sometimes pervaded the older generation hindered the progress that could be made through collaboration. Our journey led us to deep intergenerational training sessions, nurturing leadership skills among new generations of activists.
الشباب هي جد مهمة.
Working closely with both established activists and emerging young leaders.
العمل بين العاملين في الميدان مسبقا والأجيال اللاحقة أو الأجيال الشابة هو جد ضروري ولأجل خلق. أنا أعتذر فأنا أسمع الترجمة.
Opportunities must be created for each group to demonstrate.
الفرص يجب أن تطرح.
I'm still hearing the translation.
Can someone quickly work on the translation? It's coming through.
Translation was disabled. Translation was disabled. Somebody has to enable again.
هل تسمعينني؟ هل تسمعين المترجم اللغة العربية؟
So that we can hear our speaker.
Young activists have okay. We have realized that building trust among generations is pivotal. Opportunities must be created for each group to demonstrate their capabilities to the other. Young activists have faced challenges, and during these times, they have drawn on the knowledge and experience of the older generation. Simultaneously, the older generation has come to appreciate the responsiveness and intelligence of the young. Witnessing the brilliance of young leaders in action has been a revelation, received warmly by those with more experience. In essence, the unified purpose that binds us as activists is the advancement of the rights and safety of women and girls. Through our intergenerational work, a gratifying evolution is unfolding. Our movements are becoming better integrated, harnessing the strengths of both the young and the older generations. This is an embodiment of the lessons we have gleaned from history. It is an embodiment of the realization that the transformative power of gender justice with a multilateral framework transcends mere political and economic change. It leads to a society that's more peaceful, just, and harmonious for all. In conclusion, let's draw inspiration from these insights as we forge ahead in our pursuit for gender justice. Let's remember that a truly transformed multilateral approach integrates the vitality of youth with the wisdom of experience. Through such collaborations, we will not only achieve political and economic change, but also pave the path for a brighter and more equitable and empathic world. Thank you very much.
Shukran, Hibak. Thank you very much, dear friend. Your energy seems inexhaustible, like your passion for justice and intergenerational solidarity. I know that you have just traveled from, I think, Nairobi and now back in Giza in Egypt just last night. Thank you very much.
2 hours ago.
Your collective approach to the many concerns that you raised and to the work that we need to do, not the least, the advocacy and the advancement of the right of women and girls is so important. And there lies what you called the transformative power of gender justice and intergenerational justice. Thank you very much for your intervention at this webinar. I now call on Mr. Abramo Chabib, another good friend and a member of CoNGO. He's the executive director of the Italian Diplomatic Academy. Abramo, you have the screen.
Thank you. Dear Mr. President, dear Excellencies, honorable guests and member of the panel, allow me first to express my highest appreciation and to congratulate Mr. Levi Bautista, President of the CoNGO, and his team for organizing this third conference on the occasion of the 75th anniversary and bringing attention on strategic issues. It is my privilege to be invited to this important conference and to contribute to the building of a better world and the future. As IDA, Italian Diplomatic Academy, we organize every year in collaboration with the World Council on Youth and Diplomacy and several member states, the Future We Want Global Initiative for Young Leaders, one of the largest initiatives in the world aiming at empowering youth and contributing building prospective leaders. This initiative, organized in New York at the UN and in other 14 major political and economic city hubs, involves directly more than 8,000 youth from 132 countries and impacts indirectly more than 23,000 in the 5 corners of the globe. Based on our experience, there is a need for a collective and better understanding of what youth effective participation involves and how it can be implemented for all youth ages. Moreover, there is need for a collective and better understanding that not empowering youth is not fruitful to advance our societies towards a better world and future. Youth, if well mentored and equipped with skills and resources, can be a proactive part of society and has the enormous advantage that is full of energy and enthusiasm. Sometimes we might neglect the importance of this 40% segment of our society, but let us recall a few aspects. And with that link, the importance of the action of civil societies and the CoNGO with the work of all its affiliated NGOs and those who are in the process of affiliating, and the civil society at large. Most of our decision-making comes from the civil societies. As we all know, diplomats carry on important responsibility and represent the member states, but real and decision makers come from politics, which is the direct link from civil societies and activism carried out daily in the different part of the world. So civil society definitely is where decision-making shall come from. And as part of this process, youth shall be involved. And based on our experience, there are several aspects that youths are trying to contest to the adult world, and the following are recalled with insistency. Lack of involvement in current decision-making, which, despite the establishment of several institutions and mechanisms in the different countries aiming at their involvement, these are proving to be very ineffective, and in some cases, only a playground for children, but with no impact on real decision-making and policies. Lack of funding, resources, and mentorship to establish credible and effective structures and mechanisms to advance youth participation, so to institutionalize youth participation in decision-making processes. Lack of access to education, which in many times is a deterrent to personal success and personal understanding of the complexity of the world, a basis if we want to build actors of change. Of course, access to education and training is essential. And if countries are unable to afford this, then it might be more fruitful to establish access to internet as a source of self-growth and self-education, as we are now experiencing with the artificial intelligence. Lack to the UN itself, access to the UN itself, its structures, its resources, and personnel. Several times, also through CoNGO action, we have noticed that the UN, in some aspect, is inaccessible for the civil society. Actually, this aspect is one of the core pillars sustained by the CoNGO. And to emphasize that if it is true that the UN is for its people and its member states, then more accessibility shall be endorsed and ensured. Last but not least, the lack of effective, prompt, and judicious policies aimed at preserving the environment and mitigating the climate change issues. The case of the Montana state is another perfect example of the involvement of youth on environment and climate change issues. After listing these youth needs, I would like now to take this opportunity to share with you a few pragmatic ideas which might offer food for thought. As a former youth, I advise on the importance of establishing modules on civic engagement and community service within the school system. These do not represent costs to governments and are easy to put in place. And as a benefit, this will create the necessary basis for a cooperative and mutually supportive community of people. Youth shall perceive and feel their importance in the overall scheme, and at the same time shall see how all segments of society are complementary and equally engaged, and all of them benefiting from social justice and not discriminatory policies. I agree with the idea that youth cannot provide useful inputs nor outcomes in the general decision-making system without an adequate mentorship and training. Deciding for our future requires skills, knowledge, and vision. Sometimes even decision makers are struggling despite these skills. And all of these skills can be all cultivated and empowered. We generally refer to this 40% of world's population as youth, and we forget sometimes that as for the adult world, we shall be able to identify the different segments within. There are youth with skills, and there are youth with disabilities. There are youth from different corners. There are indigenous youth. All shall have equal space and access to opportunities. Most importantly, youth shall be seen as a blank page of a book. What society writes on them is what we will get as a final book. If we write good things and we have them well educated and aware of the global challenges, involving them actively, our planet and our society will benefit and will be safe hands. Let me recall this African says, an old seated man can see always farther than a standing young and strong man. For this reason, mentorship, education, and training are pivotal. It is in our highest interest to make the best of our youth and to put them in the best position to serve the needs of our society and planet. They are not another challenge. They are just another opportunity that comes to us and which shall have the wisdom to take advantage of. It is important to recall that most of our leaders comes from a civil society phase of their life. And the importance of civil society leaders in shaping global governance, the constant and tireless work with people and of people, as our president, Mr. Levi Bautista, and other leaders of NGO across the world, is significant and is truly impactful if and only if those in the position of power are able to listen and to be sensitive to our experience. No one among the different segments is carrying an experience on the ground as NGO leaders and their officers are doing. So let me once again recall that our world, which is now impacted by an important and crucial crisis, which spanned from the pandemic through an economic and now a securitarian crisis with the Ukrainian war. Now, more than ever, we need global leaders able to listen and to create even more leeway for civil society and NGO leaders to address global challenges. Only with united hands and united efforts, we will be able to tackle our global challenges. Thank you very much.
Abramo, thank you very much. Your voice is very important. If I recall, this past July, you brought more than 500 young people at the United Nations for another edition of your model UN. So your voice is critical because you work with young people, the collective understanding that you spoke about, and the greater engagement, access of young people and of civil society on the issues that matter to the world and its peoples is crucial. You mentioned civic education and civic engagement and civic action. That's the kind of engagement, and you gave two concrete examples of what needs to be done. Thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, let's express deep appreciation to our keynote presenters, Jayatma Wikranamayake, Mr. Kim Wan-soo, Ms. Hibak Osman, and Abramo Chabib. There will be no Q&A for the keynote presentations. I encourage you to write your questions on the Q&A section. I will make sure to forward them to the speakers and including your email if need be. It is now my pleasure to introduce to you Pamela Morgan, who is the co-chair of the NGO Committee on Status of Women, New York, and is also the chair of the Zonta International's United Nations Committee. And that's the committee that represents Zonta in New York, Geneva, Vienna, Nairobi, Bangkok, and many other places where UN multilateral meetings have, and Zonta has its representation. Pamela, you have panel 1 to moderate.
Thank you so much, Levy, for that introduction. And good day to everyone. And welcome to the first of 3 panels on today's third CoNGO Global Thematic Webinar, Gender Justice, Youth, and Intergenerational Justice and Solidarity for Future Generations. Our panel explores gender justice and a transformed multilateralism, interrogating our progress and meeting the Sustainable Development 2030 Agenda by focusing on SDG 5, gender equalities, SDG 11, sustainable cities and communities, as well as SDG 16, peace, justice, and strong institutions. Looking at our end goal of seeing economic, political, and social transformation by the conclusion of this ambitious agenda, we acknowledge that the issue of gender equality is paramount and that the most prudent path to achieve it is by using a multilateral approach within a transformative framework. Our focus on social justice struggles and social transformation is indeed global in nature. Although today's panelists all hail from the global South, we must bear in mind that women from the global North are also deeply entrenched in social justice struggles. The Me Too, Black Lives Matter, and George Floyd movements that indeed reverberated around the globe all included women in leadership positions, women who participated in the struggle for social transformation, and were focused on the acquisition of freedom, justice, and equality. Intersectional properties of race, class, economic level, ethnicity, sexuality, age, reproductive rights, etc., can all serve to alienate large groups, particularly women, and can serve to create and perpetuate unjust societies. In these struggles, we have witnessed women who refuse to be distracted by those properties and who forge onward in their quest for social transformation. Our panelists today are to be lauded as they have in common a humanist approach to their work on gender. Their modes of working remind me of a quote from esteemed author and activist Dr. Angela Y. Davis. Whenever you conceptualize social justice struggles, you will always defeat your own purpose if you cannot imagine the people around whom you are struggling as equal partners. It is obvious from their dedicated work that our panelists all work as equal partners to those that they serve. As we listen to today's dialogue, let us remember that the 2030 Agenda actually represents a transformative framework that has the promise to deliver just solutions in a transformed social environment for future generations. I extend our warm welcome and gratitude to our illustrious panelists. Lily Bassour, founder and director, Voice for Change, and she's a member of the UN Women's Civil Society Advisory Group. Elizabeth Sabet Cox, former regional head, Pacific Multi-Country Office of United States Women Australia. Sylvie Jacqueline Ndongmo, International President, Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, WILPF Cameroon. And Ndai Sahur, Senior Gender Advisor, former convener, Women's International War Crimes Tribunal, Philippines, and to Mara Cohen, the rapporteur for this session. I will start our dialogue with a question to Lily. Welcome, Lily.
Thank you, Pamela.
You're welcome. I think, okay. As leading human rights defender in Papua New Guinea, you have had many difficult experiences mediating community conflicts ranging from accusations of sorcery to other domestic violence. In 2022, the Constitutional Law and Reform Commission took a significant step towards stronger protections for men and women like you defending human rights in Papua New Guinea by signing a MOU with UN Women to conduct consultations on a human rights defenders bill and to provide technical assistance in the drafting of the bill. Can you describe your experiences as a human rights defender protecting women from accusations of sorcery, and then describe how this new bill will protect you from harm?
Pierre, thank you, Pamela. New Guinea is a small country. It has been come into contact with the outside world in the 1950s from the highlands of Papua New Guinea, and where we are working as a human rights defender in the front line defending it. The human rights defenders in Papua New Guinea and in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, we are not recognized and we are not supported properly. What you're talking about, the UN in consultation trying to draft up the human rights defenders bill, it's taking a process, but it's very slow. And it's very slow, and this needs to be sped up. And then I think I was part of the process too, but like it needs to be sped up, and then really look at how the human rights defenders on the ground to be supported. As an experience as a human rights defender on the ground, it's very complex given the different societies and the cultural norms and all this were put our women in a very difficult position, and the cultural traditions and norms that devalues the women and then discriminate the women. It's very difficult as a woman human rights defender trying to defend the rights of another woman. I draw my energy and my support from my immediate family, from my immediate family, and to be able to carry out a rescue, to be able to rescue people who are in danger, they are tortured or about to be, tortured, from sorcery accusations related violence. So yes, in Papua New Guinea, we have people who are human rights defenders from the highlands, who are working in the area of conflict, who are working in the area of sorcery accusations related violence, who are rescuing women. They are putting their lives out in there. but there is not enough support system in place for the human rights defenders. And like as for myself, I feel that I am burned out of all the work that we do trying to defend. And when you look at the human rights defenders, and especially the women human rights defenders, this is a special group of people that they are really going out there with a special passion to be able to uphold and protect another human being. So I think we do welcome the UN doing this consultation to come up with this women human rights defenders bill, and that needs to be sped up, and that need to be actually put into use, practically put into use. Thank you.
Thank you so much. And that's implementation is always the key to any policy. If it's not implemented, it serves no good. So thank you so much for your powerful words. Our next question is for Elizabeth Sabet Cox. And Sabet, welcome. And from—
Thank you, Pamela.
You're welcome. From the time of your master's thesis in 1972, which is so impressive, women oppressed, women organized and planned rural resettlement schemes, to your work in Fiji, a specific women program director for UN Women, to your work on gender-based violence in Papua New Guinea, you have spent more than 4 decades of your extensive career focusing on improving the lives of women and girls in Asia Pacific. My question to you is, what do you see as being the main historical drivers that halt gender justice for women in Asia Pacific, thus preventing a secure, sustainable, and transformative future? And what is needed to combat these issues?
Yes, well, I think following on from what my colleague Lily Besuas had to say, and her powerful voice and her powerful message about work at the coalface, my original work was also at the coalface. It was with farmers. Lily also was working with farmers in Papua New Guinea. But because of the changing context since independence in Papua New Guinea almost 50 years ago, and for other Pacific nations, things have changed dramatically in our region. So we are struggling with both the legacy of late colonialism in our region, but also the contemporary struggles for the exploitation of resources and for the geopolitical struggle that's going on in our region. So the ways in which we work have dramatically changed. The Pacific is rich, a culturally rich region and a culturally diverse region. And I think the challenge for multilateral work and the work of the United Nations is to be able to connect with all of that diversity and be able to connect with the innovation and creativity of frontline workers who are able to work through multiple languages, work with simple technologies and methods to translate global norms and standards into the smallest communities, which was the vision of the Declaration of Human Rights, bringing this home to the most local level. So the struggles are to have that connection, and the struggles are to minimize the bureaucracy that's involved in development partnerships and the delivery of development services and financing. I think we are troubled now in our region because it's a very expensive region to operate, and we are troubled by the cost and the lack of connectivity. So sometimes I think that in the era of the World Conferences on Women, which we managed through snail mail and without internet, we had greater connection and greater communication and solidarity than we do have now, relying on in the digital age on digital communications. So I think there is a disconnect between the capitals and the rural areas of the Pacific Island nations. And I think this is particularly a challenge for multilaterals to be able to understand that disconnect and find ways of working more directly with organizations and networks like those that Lily Basua is leading and engaged with
to be able to work really in solidarity and as directly and as cost efficiently and as locally and culturally appropriate, and in ways that give real leadership and voice to women.
Thank you so much for that thoughtful response. And the economics of the situation always seem to dictate outcomes that are not the best for the common man. And so I think that's something to that has to be considered. And I also want to say that I'm very appreciative of your acknowledgement of the work of Lily and others in your region, because that is exactly what Angela Davis was talking about, that we come together as one and we understand that we're all part of the same collective. So thank you so much. My next question is to Sylvie Jacqueline Ndongmo. And Sylvie, in your role as a peace activist, you recently said, and I quote, "To me, the feminist peace approach means acting from the insights and experiences of women, men, girls, and boys that explicitly renders visible the differential and gendered power structures in relations that often play out at the detrimental extreme during threats to peace. For instance, building peace requires a gender-centered approach to work closely with the lived experiences and contributions of everyone amid conflictual situations." This is indeed a very powerful quote. Can you please elaborate on this quote for our audience, sharing your experience and how a gender-centered approach in conflictual situations could be constructed and implemented?
Thank you so much, Pamela, for giving me the floor. Permit me to first send greetings from the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, and to say that it's our greatest honor to be invited to share our views in this very important panel. I want to say that, start by saying that commitment to the ideal of multilateralism goes back to the creation, to the setting of will in 1915, when our founding mothers urged the creation of an organization, the Society of Nations, to deal not with the rules of warfare, but with the practical proposal for international cooperation. And today we still hold to that, all the challenge that the system is having today. And we also understand that these challenges are some opportunity for restructuring the way the world operates. We have observed and seen that so far, the operation is for the people with the biggest bomb to act as the biggest bullies. So our world order has been deliberately constructed of the principle of militarized security, and therefore it discourages or encourages investment in weapons and war instead of the well-being of the people of the planet, instead of a human rights-centered approach. So the women who gathered in the midst of the First World War had a vision of permanent peace, constituted through cooperation, equity, justice, and non-violence. And we all know that gender justice is a fundamental principle of human development and the realization of peaceful, just, and inclusive society. I want to say that I made this powerful declaration because we have been able to identify some gaps, some factors into gender justice. And I want to indicate one or two of these gaps. The first is that global governance is driven by patriarchy. When you look around the world, you see that militarism and military activity supported by the global financial system and war profiteers continue to fuel violence in the name of security, leading, of course, to deepening inequality and exacerbating environmental destruction. And no living being, no human being on earth is left untouched by this militarism, which affects at different levels. So we have also noted that there is flagrant lack of global leadership for peace. We have global leadership for weapons for war, but we still want to see global leadership for peace. And we have also noticed that there is a lack of funding to promote universal social protection. What we think that what should be done is that we need to find hope, courage, and strength in our activism. We need to resist and disrupt the root causes of these inequalities. We need to firmly condemn the system of oppression. We need to speak the truth to power. We need to speak the truth and build stronger alliances and solidarity. Thus, the importance of our being here together. And we also need to, I want to share briefly and end there. For example, what we are doing at WILF. At WILF, we think that we have a vision of a world of permanent peace built on feminist foundation, freedom, justice, non-violence, etc. And we think that the planet, the people, and all inhabitants, need to coexist and flourish in harmony. And we also diagnosed within WILF that the causes of war, of lack of peace today, are the different system of operation that seeks to dominate people and the planet through physical, psychological, and economic violence. We think that it's important to do proper gender analysis. We need to do proper gender analysis in order to address the root causes of conflict through feminist lens. And WILF have been doing that over the world in different countries. We in Cameroon, for example, benefited from the experience of WILF and other organizations to conduct a gender conflict analysis. We also look into mobilizing men for feminist peace. For us at WILF, we think that violence is not inevitable. It is a choice, but we have to choose non-violence as a mean and also as an end. We will liberate the strengths of women, but very true, but we also need to work in partnership with like-minded men to bring back to a just and harmonious world. And I want to say that the intention to talk about the young WILF, of course, the young WILF perspectives are going to be shared in panel 2 because we have a young WILF network member who's going to talk on behalf of WILF. But I want to say that at WILF, we have put highest priority in the young WILF network, and we are providing them with the necessary support for them to shape the agenda of the movement for reimagining multilateralism. The youth are now taking the lead in developing social movement from the bottom up to respond to injustice, violence, and crisis.
Thank you so much.
I just want to conclude, if you allow me to conclude. Yes. I'll just conclude by saying two things. That the challenges before us are profound, but we need to create a powerful movement. And for that, I invite you to join our WILF Path to Peace. Let's redouble our effort towards a collective vision of feminist permanent peace. We have to connect local to global action. We have to remember that we have peace in our hand, and we need to think on how do we use the peace we have in our hand. And let's not forget that the least action we take for peace is our way to show humanity. Thank you. I'll be able to share more information later. Thank you.
Thank you so much. You packed so much into that 5 minutes, from mobilizing men for feminist peace to the patriarchy and how it drives the militarism and how that is the focus rather than on peace. It was really inspirational, and I am so glad that you are part of this panel, just as the other panelists. Thank you. And I will be joining the WILF Path to Peace. Thank you. And our final panelist for this round is Ndai Sahur. And Ndai, you have extensive experience working in situations of war, armed conflicts, and natural disasters in Asia Pacific, Africa, and the Middle East, as well as experience directing the development projects, gender governance and women, peace and security projects of UNDP in Afghanistan, Somalia, and Sudan Darfur. Reflecting on your 30+ years of work with women in areas of conflict, years where you were forced to deal with the systemic oppression of women in vulnerable situations, please describe for us your insights regarding the necessity of the acquisition of gender equality as a fundamental human right for the population of women that you serve. And please give examples, if possible, of what might be done, of what must be done to secure transformative futures for women in these situations.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Pamela, for your very good question, and hello to everyone. First of all, I would like us to talk about what is gender equality, because this is the theme of what we are talking about here. Yeah, we need to recognize that gender equality is a human rights issue, first and foremost. When we talk about ensuring gender equality in our work, in relation to women's empowerment and to girls' empowerment in our advocacy or in our campaign, we are talking about the unequal relations between women and men. And this we need to acknowledge that men have more privileging in political, social, and economic sphere, while women have been relegated historically by patriarchy to be second citizen, or worse, to have no rights at all. I think it's important when we are discussing multilateralism without the gender approach of recognizing where women are positioned in our society, then we are failing. And why is it that gender equality is a human rights issue? For example, in many of the countries that I have worked with, in all our countries, men have the right to own the land, but women cannot own the land. When the father or husband dies, the properties goes to the son or the brother. The sons can go to school while girls stay home and take care of other siblings. So when we talk about gender equality, when we talk about peace, when we talk about equal participation in society, we need to rethink on the policies and the normative framework that we are pushing in our organizations within the United Nations on how we are ensuring that this is done. And I would say that in many levels of this, even the United Nations has not able or was not able, is still unable to come to that level of recognition of paving the way for gender equality. When I was working in Afghanistan with UNDP as gender advisor, we have made great strides in bringing young girls to school, giving women opportunities to run for political office, as Afghanistan was one of the countries in the world with the most women in the parliament. But all of that now is gone because of male patriarchy. The systemic denial of women's human rights and control of men over women needs to be examined at all levels of our approach on when we talk about multilateralism. We need to address this issue of gender inequality in a multilateral approach. We are talking here of intergenerational. But when you look at what does intergenerational means, when 50% of the population of the world have no equal rights to the other 50% of the population, then we have failed. We are failing the women. The most dangerous work now is to be a women's human rights defenders. And I think Lily, Sylvie, and my dear friend Elizabeth all knows this. They know the issues that they had been fighting for. And why is it more dangerous to be a women's human rights, fighting for women's human rights? How many women's human rights defenders have been killed, kidnapped, raped, assassinated for fighting for their rights? So when we are talking here of intergenerational approach, let us re-examine the policies and the normative framework we are doing, because these are all big words, but in the application to the local situation of where Lily is working in the highlands of Papua New Guinea, where every day, 24/7, she is at risk of helping women who've been accused of sorcery killing. Lily and Elizabeth have witnessed how these women have been extremely tortured. I have been to Papua New Guinea in the highlands, and I know the struggles that women go through. Women are burned at stake in this day and age of artificial intelligence. So we need to re-examine here right now with this forum when we are talking of intergenerational approach to human rights and how the future human rights would be when the struggle is right now here in our situation, in this very context where we are in. That is the challenge that we are all needing to address, because without it, then the whole framing that we have been fighting for within the UN, within our governments, will not be acknowledged and will not elevate the situation of women if we don't take any drastic move to ensure that women take their position in the society equally with the men. And I think that's the challenge that we need to go through right now when we are deconstructing the whole notion of multilateralism, when we are looking at what would be the intergenerational approach when the oppression and discrimination of women is intergenerational in itself. Young girls, to be all the way to becoming a woman, have always been oppressed. That is intergenerational. Their grandmothers are oppressed. Their mothers are oppressed. She is oppressed. That is intergenerational. So when we address this issue now, it is important for us to acknowledge that this is the threat of our societies, that to have a better human rights for the future, we need first to address the issues of the disempowerment and systemic discrimination of women. Whole nations like Afghanistan are systematically violating women's human rights, and all our countries are doing that just the same. So we need to re-examine that at the forefront of our struggle is that 50% of our population, which are women, are out there fighting. And we need all our colleagues in the male sector to come and join us in that. Let the women lead and join us in partnership.
And I thank you so much for those powerful comments and your comments agreeing with Sylvie in the importance of mobilizing men for a feminist peace. I think rings for us, UN Women has a he for she campaign that Zonta International has participated in. And we can't say enough that the world needs to mobilize around protecting women and women peacemakers, and making sure that, as you said, that half the world has the ability to thrive and live and contribute. So we are almost out of time, but we have a lightning round. And the lightning round is a question that we're going to answer in 2 minutes or less. And the question is, in her noted book, Freedom is a Constant Struggle, Dr. Angela White Davis said that it is in collectivities that we find reservoirs of hope and optimism, which is a necessary trait that the world needs to move forward. Can you provide for this audience an example of a collectivity that has developed a multilateral, transformative approach to gender justice that gives you hope in terms of our ability to meet the 2030 agenda? And it's 2 minutes. So we'll start with Elizabeth.
Well, I would hark back to the time when there were world conferences on women and when there were local, sub-regional, regional, and global convenings and solidarity built. And this was an era in which we overcame distance, we overcame language and communication problems, and real solidarity was built. And this really energized and fueled the women's movements of the Pacific region for the previous decades. And this is something that we are finding hard to sustain now because the money is not being invested in this convening, which is so critical in countries that are so distant from each other, so important. The digital divide is not being overcome, and we are creating vertical accountability and bureaucracy in the delivery of aid and support. And I think this is the challenge. How do we recreate the horizontal solidarity and the convening and the real feeling that we are a collective movement from the most local through to the national, regional, and global levels?
Thank you for that powerful response. The looking at the digital divide and horizontal solidarity and how one is really preventing the other from taking place. That's excellent. Thank you so much. Lily, your 2-minute response to the question, please.
Looking from the rural side of women, where we're working with women with high illiteracy rate, and the information and all this it's not accessible. How could we help? How could we bring the women into a decision making, into a collective decision making, where they can be able to participate, understand equally? This is with rural women in the context that we are working is quite challenging, and they need to be, the information has to be accessible, has to be translated into a way they can be able to access and understand. And as I see that, if they can be able to really understand the benefits and the importance of it, then we are starting to create this movement of women actually coming, looking into space where we can give them the space and where they can be able to raise their voices together collectively on issues that they can be able to raise them collectively. It is the approach that needs a long-term approach, and in different contexts, that you make sure that you get these women onto the table, and then to keep this continuously keeping this fire burning, so that the woman can see that there is a need to do that. I think in our recent, one of the example I can share is in our recent, we had 2 women's forum from the very rural areas. The women raised the concern of the production and consumption of the substance of marijuana in our community. It's produced and consumed freely among the young people. And the women were able to congregate and able to come together, and it has taken some time before actually getting the women together, and then we were able to get these women marched to the provincial office to be able to share this concern. So I think that is possible, but given the context and where you're operating from, it needs resources and it needs time, and it needs collective approaches where that momentum needs to be built and then to be kept moving forward. Thank you.
Excellent, thank you. And that is really promising to hear about the women getting together and marching to the provincial office over their concerns about marijuana. That's very powerful. Thank you. Next, Sylvie, could you please respond to the question about what gives you hope?
Yeah, what gives me hope is the work which is being done in the communities and which is being expanded. I just want to give 2 examples. One is what we call reimagining the peace in the MENA region. I want to give this example. For the past decade, one of the Will Syrian partners called Bael has engaged in peace-building effort with grassroots feminist women-led organizations inside and outside Syria to advance issue of accountability, inclusive peace and justice within Syrian context. And the work he has done has supported numerous local-led initiatives by women, created space for exchange and learning between grassroots civil society, and fostered capacity building. And beyond this, Badel has contributed to innovating spaces to expand the feminist political imagination of every there's a political action within and outside formal institution setting. So for me, this is an example, this which is very important as it's a transformative feminist approach. The other one that I want to share is this cross-regional cooperation within WILF Africa, for example, where through the annual meetings, sections within the continent do meet, and this meeting, this experience sharing has supported the different sections, the different countries in having their national action plan on 1325, their women, peace and security agenda. And lastly, I mentioned the mobilizing men for feminist peace. This experience has been conducted by WILF since 2020, and is being conducted in many countries, including Afghanistan, Colombia, DRC, and the result is a rich body of research which sheds light on the concept of militarized masculinity as a key driver of conflict and aggression, the way it manifests itself in conflict society, how it is sustained, and spotlight the stories of men doing vital work alongside women activists to achieve peace. So these are examples that I can share, which really give me hope. And of course, the youth give me a lot of hope, because we need to ensure this generational transition so that the youth can really take over and be able to take our fight over. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much. So you have many reasons to have hope, and we can learn from your example. Thank you so much. And lastly, Ndai, if you could share with us your response to the question, what gives you hope?
Well, thank you, Pamela. There's so many things that give us hope. I mean, the grassroots women's movement has really proven that they can make changes. And then the work on the ground has constantly, have proven that they are able not only to shift the terrain, but also the laws in their communities and within their country. But what is necessary to support this hope is funding. In the recent United Nations assessment on how much money is being given to gender equality, only 2% of the development aid goes to gender equality. And this needs to be examined, out of the millions and hundreds of millions of dollars being given to development aid, you only have a few percentage that goes directly to finance the work of women on the ground. And when we look at and recognize the importance that everything starts at the community level, it's never been top down in our governments. The government did not enact laws, because they are thinking of women. Let's not forget that the United Nations only recognized women's human rights in 1993, and because we have to fight for it. Yeah, nothing in the normative framework of the United Nations that is related, whether it's women, peace and security, or the recognition of women's human rights. It was all fought because women rallied, marched, and picketed to demand for these rights. It was not like one day the UN recognized that we should give women their rights. No, it was the women on the ground who fought for it. But now that we have recognized this, it's important that we start giving funding to the women. And this is part of our, multilateralism aim, that we are able to support one another. And without that funding, we will still be in that same situation of women scratching the surface and fighting for their rights at all levels of their societies. So that's our challenge.
Thank you so much. And you defined the challenge perfectly, because even with all of the grassroots movement that we've seen as being successful, we know that economics is a huge driver of the oppression that women face, from land ownership to even with the women who are being deemed sorcerers. We know that there is an economics side to that. So I think we must be vigilant in petitioning for greater funding. And, we have to participate in the financing for development conversations, and we have to be present. So I thank all of our panelists for these inspirational reflections, and I really do hope to hear more from each of you in the future. At this time, the floor is open for Q&A. If there are any questions, please place them in the Q&A section in chat, and we will respond. And at this time, there are no open questions.
Thank you very much, Pamela, for an excellent panel. Thank you for an excellent moderating, and thank you very much to all our panelists. Inday from Philippines joining us today from New York. Sylvie joining us from Cameroon. Elizabeth joining us. Elizabeth, are you now in Fiji or you're still in Australia?
I'm in transit. I'm in a hotel on my way.
And Lily from Papua New Guinea. From the bottom of my heart, on behalf of CoNGO, and I'm sure your moderator Pamela shares this with me. Thank you very much for relevant, informative, bold statements. Now we need to make the change now, and you've given indications to that. Thank you. Before we get, that's a round of applause. Actually, for Filipinos, we actually animate that when we say a round of applause. Thank you. Before we go to the next panel, I want to remind you that we are also live streaming on YouTube. So we have far more participants than who you see on the screen. Joining us on the web platform is about 185, but we are also live streaming on YouTube, and Toyomi will put on screen the QR code. Start tweeting, start sending messages to TikTok, start sending your message through Facebook and Instagram and LinkedIn by scanning the QR code. Send the message to governments, to civil society peers, and to member states. Get the message out and weigh in on the many national and multilateral themes that are before us. Ladies and gentlemen, let's now move to panel 2. One of the benefits of working in a nonprofit, non-governmental organization, not usually staffed by more than what's needed, is the occasional gem of having interns and volunteers and trainees. And this past summer, I worked with 10 young professionals from France, from all over France. They came to train with me between June 5th and the 3rd week of August. They have since left New York and gone back to their places of work and study, all of them at the master's and doctoral level. They have all gone back to France, but before they left, we recorded this entire session. I hope you like it. Are the youth the hope of the future? Are you? I think and I believe you are. You are already the hope of the present. Even more, I believe you are the future of hope itself. To invoke Martin Luther King, if the future is now, there is a first urgency of that now, because what we do now affects both the present and the future, and that future is now. What we call the future generation is among us now, and the problems we are confronted with in our world today are affecting them, in fact, all of us. This summer, at the start of June, I have had the pleasure of hosting young people from different parts of France. They trained with me under the program of Inspire Change Corporate, under the leadership of Marie-Charlotte Steur. Their training centered around the United Nations and how this multilateral body is addressing the issues dear and near to the concerns of young people. They attended as many events at the UN and surrounding venues as their NGO badge allowed them. It is my pleasure, ladies and gentlemen, friends, to present in this panel to these young people whose youth belie the professional training and expertise they already bring to the table. So I asked them a very simple question, one particular question with two parts. Tell me what your fears today are, then tell me also your hopes for the future. If we are to recognize that our young people are claiming their future, then that future is now. Any conception of future generations must contend with the young people's expressed desire to be primary stakeholders of their future, and that they must have a seat at tables where their future is at stake, be it at the meal tables with family and friends, at peace tables negotiating conflicts and tensions, or at decision-making tables and multilateral bodies like the United Nations. I am fortunate to have a group of young professionals, all under 30, who have worked with me while doing their research in New York. I have been blessed by their presence, but even more, by sharing who they are and what they do, and what the future augurs for them, because they are acting upon that future. So on with the discussions. Aliyah.
Well, Levi, I would say my worst fear is both very intimate and very political. It is related to the fact that I was born and I identify as a woman in a world where gender equality is still far from being achieved. My gender is not something I can act on to change. It is who I am. And like many women, I am deeply aware of all the way it can make me discriminated against in a patriarchal society. In the professional area, indeed, women have fewer opportunities to access leadership positions. When they do, their salary remains globally lower than the ones of their male colleagues with equivalent responsibilities. In the family structure, women dedicate more time than their male partner to housekeeping, administrative, planning, and educative tasks, while being more at risk of suffering from domestic abuse. Even the everyday act of walking in the street is not sourceless act for my gender. From common street harassment to assault, the public space is hardly ever totally safe for women. There have been significant improvement in gender equality over the year. Compared to my grandmother, I was born with the right to vote, to have my own bank account, and to have bodily autonomy over issues such as contraception or abortion. However, recent significant regression make me fear that my young nieces might not grow up with the same rights. We see the abortion right being drastically curtailed in Poland or in the United States, for example. That being said, I am well aware that those considerations focus on Western societies. Even if the situation of European and American women leaves much to be desired, it remains very privileged compared to those of women in other countries. What's more, even in those countries, women have significant differences according to their skin color, sexual orientation, social background, or disability. Discrimination are interlinked and systemic, and should be fought against as such. What about you, Jessica? What do you think?
Yes, I think gender equality is also a subject that I have questions about, especially regarding the private sector. Women and men remain unequally represented in a large number of sectors and industries, and their salaries remain unequal for the same positions. Data from INSEE, the French National Institute for Statistics and Economic Studies, showed that the wage gap between women and men was around 4% for comparable working hours and position in 2021. Also, people with disabilities remain underrepresented in companies. Although the 1980 French law for the employment of disabled people imposes a quota of 6% of disabled employees, the private sector is struggling to reach 3.9%. One of my fears also concerns the integration of refugees. Even today, we don't know how to enable men, women, and children who have lost everything in their country of origin to rebuild their lives by facilitating access to refugee status and appropriate career path. As the number of refugees has increased due to the climate crisis, we urgently need to find human solutions to promote their inclusion. Predominant in our societies, all this division fuel inequality and perpetuate the destructive model of capitalism and paternalism. I'm afraid that we're still moving too slowly in including people in need in society through work, exacerbating the existing social fractures. What about you, Leah?
Thank you, Jessica. Personally, my worst fear is related to the unfair treatment that minorities and people of colors face in their daily lives. Being a part of a racial minority in the country I live in, I experienced very early as a young person different forms of discrimination and racism. My parents are from Algeria, but I was born and raised in France. My identity as an Arab woman is not something that I could or would change. It is one of the components that made me who I am today. But I also know that for the same reason I will face as other person of colors more difficulty in every aspect of my life. Indeed, internalized racism is deeply rooted in Western society due to previous colonization. We started from the very beginning with a disadvantage not within our control. Racial minorities and people of colors are penalized in all aspects of society, from professional to housing opportunities, as well as their constant concern for safety in public space, which is more related to racism and xenophobia. All these differentiated and uneven treatments lead to tension and conflicts, as Victoria will say and talk about, and no communication, which leads to extreme causing greater polarization. The murder in France of a young Arab boy 2 months ago by a policeman emphasized my constant insecurity and questioned myself of how far will this unequal treatment will go or continue, and for how long will minorities have to live with these insecurities and these fears.
It's a good question at the end, Leah. So let's see how Victoria handles and proceeds from that question.
Personally, my biggest fear is division, which leads to conflicts. We have noticed for several years that people and population that tend to be divided also tend to enter into more conflicts. Everything becomes more violent and disagreements turn into violence. There are different factors why there are so public affairs and policies for sure, but also let's not forget about social media that have a significant role. As Leah explained before, racial discrimination and also gender discrimination undeniably lead to conflicts, including internal conflicts like those happening in France for several years now, and even more recently, but also armed conflicts in different areas of the world, such as Africa, the Middle East, and Europe. There are fractures within the same state, even more than international fractures between states. The United States is divided between conservatives and Democrats, leading to internal violence, including ideological divisions and culture wars jeopardizing women's rights. France is divided over immigration policy and labor regulations, leading to police violence too. Moreover, the fight against terrorism is a real international matter too. Geneva law about armed conflict is lacking and does not include asymmetrical conflicts like conflicts between an organized group and a state, which is also about terrorism. There are new areas and new subjects that need to be regulated with binding normative instruments. Another reason for that is environmental issues and ecological problems, such as the lack of resources that are only getting worse. As states realize shortages in water and food resources, competition to find such resources heightens, potentially leading to conflicts, and when violence becomes the rule, armed conflicts will arise.
Thank you, Victoria. Actually, what you said raised an important conflict raised is a point important for me. It resonates with my personal fear, which is our inaction regarding environmental destruction. Because we can only resolve conflicts and wars if we address the most important issue of the century, which is the destruction of the environment. This destruction and the destruction of the resources will reinforce existing inequalities, as mentioned by the other panelists, as Leah or Elia, and create also new ones. The lack of water, the destruction of ocean biodiversity, the global warming, the disappearance of species, it will create new global conflicts, and that will remain unsolvable unless we find a way to manage our resources appropriately and protect our planet efficiently. So my greatest fear is that we will reach a stage of destruction of nature that will prevent us from turning back.
Despite all the warnings from scientists and all the great speeches on the subject, the actions taken remain insufficient. So nature is resilient, but only up to a point. There's too many planetary limits that have been already exceeded, and we should act accordingly. We need to protect nature, at the very least because it is useful to us and because we need it. And personally, my concern are even bigger for the ocean. As a surfer and a diver, the ocean is central to my personal life. We don't know much about these immense spaces, and yet we are already destroying it. We should do something about it, and as Sylvia Earle said during the World Ocean Day at the United Nations in the beginning of June, the most important thing we take from the ocean isn't the fish or the krill, it's our own life, because the more we take from the ocean, the more we take from our life. So it is in our interest to survive. If we want to survive, we need to protect the environment, because it is a selfish move to do if we want to live. And I just want to end up with something. I'm not saying that there is no will. There is a will, like we want to do something, and this will enable us to make advances that cannot be denied, but this is not enough, and more is needed because there are blockages at other levels than the willingness.
I'm so pleased about the movement of fears from social and personal relations into global planetary concerns. And I think, Chloe, you proceed to develop further the idea of environmental destruction.
Yeah, thank you, Levi, of course. My biggest fear today is the slowness of ambitious environmental decision. We can see that the problem is not the lack of will, but the way that will is implemented and the divergence in achieving our common goal. While solutions for climate change consequences must be global, the stumbling blocks in international agreements illustrate the limits of multilateralism in the face of emergency. Here are a few examples. At the time of Copenhagen and Canton agreements, Pablo Solon, former Bolivian ambassador of the United Nations, criticized the approach based on voluntary contribution by states to reduce the harmful effects of environmental degradation. I quote, "Imagine you want to build a dam to protect a village from flooding. Everyone brings the stone they want to the dam. Some bring more because they have a greater sense of responsibility, but a certain height is needed to hold back the flood. Then you realize that the dam isn't big enough to protect you." On another note, the head of Australian government was criticized in 2021 for announcing that his country would achieve carbon neutrality as soon as possible, and preferably by 2050, but without making any commitments in that direction. In the same period, the temporary withdrawal of the United States from the Paris Agreement raised concern about its commitment to international financing against the adverse effects of climate change in the country of South. Pascal Canfin, a former of the European Parliament for Europe Ecology, also pointed out that the climate faces many objections in the name of social justice. In France, we are told that it's unthinkable to increase the price of fuels because of the fuel poverty, because of suburban households are forced to have 2 cars. Whatever the country, we will encounter this kind of blockage unless we implement public policy that articulate justice and transition. Similarly, in 2013, neonicotinoid insecticides harmful to bees and a pollinator raised concern about biodiversity and food safety. In response to this concern, the European Union considered banning certain neonicotinoids. However, under pressure from the chemical industry and certain agricultural groups who argued that these pesticides were essential to protect crops from pests and ensure high agricultural yields, the European Court of Justice ruled that these insecticides would be definitely banned only from 2021. It took 8 years for these 2 directives to come into effect. And that brings me here. Today, we live in the hope that individual and collective interests can converge in the name of a common global goal. Reality shows us that measures to protect sustainable development in one region is not exempt from injustice elsewhere. We know that governments, but also private actors, will not allow themselves to be harmed by cost endorse policy that is detrimental to them, although better for the planet. It's necessary to change the institution decision-making process, particularly lobbying role in rulemaking, to achieve a fast and equitable transition. We know that multilateralism has enabled much progress, but we cannot be satisfied with decades of progress with the awareness that more is needed. We can't maintain the excess of our system.
That's an interesting statement you made. We cannot maintain the excesses of our system. The plot gets thicker. Let's hear from Alice.
Yes, my main fear concerns the way we try to solve the ecological crisis. I think we're entirely missing the points. The first thing is that in our society, biodiversity loss is still overshadowed by economic stakes, whereas it's the supreme threat. So we won't achieve any SDGs in a world where nature collapses. So protecting nature must be a priority and not a secondary issue. Secondly, I think we tackle ecological issues independently of each other, but trying to solve problems one by one makes the situation worse. So for example, electric cars are presented as a solution to the climate crisis, but their manufacture causes enormous mining pollution, and thus it exacerbates biodiversity loss. So it's time to adopt a systemic vision because ecological problems are complex and interact. And it's also time to admit that the only way to reduce our impacts on nature is through the degrowth paradigm, not green growth. And finally, I'd like to talk about how we protect nature. For decades, the solutions promoted by our governments and by the UN have generally been technological, scientific, and financial. More innovation, more data, more money, and despite all these efforts, we're still failing to protect nature. But this is normal. I mean, we're not tackling the roots of the problem here. We focus on pollution, climate change, biodiversity collapse, but these are only the symptoms of a much deeper illness, humans. So it's not really nature that needs to be protected, it's us, our civilization, that needs fundamental change. Planting trees or saving some species will only be useful if we totally shift our mindset. There's no point actually in protecting nature as long as we perceive it as an object to be exploited and as long as nature is reduced to its instrumental or worse economic value. Because yes, today, at the UN, for instance, we talk about natural capital, ecosystem services, and green economy. So nature is becoming an object offering various services that can be marketed and then financialized. But we don't protect nature here, we absorb it into our capitalist system. And this mindset reflects precisely what we need to stop, an anthropocentric Western visions of nature domination. So I think that if we don't manage to achieve environment-related SDGs, it's because we lack, first and foremost, an ecological consciousness. More than data, technologies, or innovations, it's our moral stance that we need to shift above all. And for this, we need to reconnect deeply with nature, not with technology, but with our hearts. So yes, my greatest fear today is that we'll continue our mad race for growth, technology, and innovation without questioning ourselves, thinking that this paradigm can save the living world, when in reality it keeps destroying it.
You raised about the moral perspective, and it's important because budgets are moral documents. When you raised financialization, all that governments and even private sector would do, there's just not enough money. There's enough money for war, but there's not enough money for improving our planetary life. So financialization is a moral question. And as long as we don't fund the things that make people and the planet sustainable and secure, as a moral bankruptcy. So thank you very much. Cyprian, how do we pursue further the conversation that we have heard?
I mean, I really enjoyed the discussion so far, and I think we raised very interesting points. But I think my main concern and my fear here is that we, educated and wealthy enough people to have time to discuss that, we are gathering today in this meeting room just like some other brilliant people did yesterday and the day before, and maybe so on and so forth for decades actually. And they gathered and they talked about similar concerns and with similar evidence out there in the world. And I feel like we know that our living standards are far beyond our planet's bearable capacity, like Alice mentioned. And this is not new. I mean, the UN, 75 years ago, they've been created like we're not even born. The IPCC, it was 30 years ago. The limits to growth, that was 50 years ago. So all the evidence are out there. And all this intention, all trying to heal our sick civilization, but yet inequalities among and within countries keep on rising. And yet our ecological footprint has never been more significant than now. And so what? When will we accept that we need to change? Actually, we need to transform our paradigm. It's not about minor adjustment or technical fix. And just like Alice mentioned, it's about transforming and inventing a new paradigm where we could think differently. It's about our political and economic structures. It's about our social interactions, the way we move, the way we eat, the way we consume. We need to forget the old world, ditch it, and look beyond our traditional lenses. And as long as privileged people like us here today in this room continue discussing in such like nice rooms with air conditioning, but really out of touch with the harsh reality, I feel like nothing will change. And as long as we seek to develop and grow our extractivist and unsustainable economic activities, nothing will change. And the worst in that, in my opinion, is that this so-called game of development and progress, played by most of the wealthy nations, does not make even people happier or better off. Because what we observe is that once the basic needs are covered, making economic growth, it doesn't increase happiness. So I am scared. I'm scared that we will pursue the same deadly path, ruining the planet and not making humanity better off. And obviously I'm saying this as a privileged person, but I think that we all are here. I fear and I'm scared, I'm truly scared that we continue to go blindly in the same direction when we need a radical transformation, a radical shift of our paradigm. I am scared that we will still be here in this room 30 years from now discussing the same concerns with even worse evidence.
Paradigmatic shifts. I'm so glad to hear it from you, because I think after hearing already so many and more is about to come, what you're calling for is not just paradigmatic shift, but a tectonic awakening
Yes.
of the consciousness of people.
Yeah.
So it's not just a changing of the scientific knowledge, but a changing of a mindset,
Yes.
a combination of the two. Let's go back to something much more personal. Fear to have children. Let's go on.
Yeah, thank you, Levi. And thank you to everyone who made really great points today. That's amazing. I'm really grateful to be here today. So my current fear is that our children will have to live in an insecure world and moreover a world suffering from climate change. I don't want to have any children so long as the state will not take drastic measures to assure some security and stability for them. And I think that many people old enough to ask themselves if they want children are asking themselves the question. And it's an issue if there's no future generations, obviously. We should leave a sustainable world for them so they can pursue previous generations' work, or else there is no hope.
Thank you, Diane. The mantra at the UN for sustainable development is for people and the planet. With your presentation, we come full circle. We started with people concerns to the planetary concerns, and then we go back to children. That nothing that we do, if it were not for the protection of children today and them being the future generation, will redound to nothing, because unless we protect the children now, the future is compromised.
Yes.
Are you ready to talk about the sources of your hopes and what those are?
Yeah.
So many fears. they're valid and warranted. And ladies and gentlemen, you've been warned about those fears, but be excited with me to hear about their hopes.
I do share this concern about the world that will be left for our children, but I also think that the younger generation can be a source of hope. We're witnessing a new generation that no longer hesitates to take its place in the public debate and act on its own initiative. It's a more informed and politically aware generation. Numerous bottom-up initiatives are shaking up established institutions, and personalities are leading on those issues, like Greta Thunberg did for the Friday for Future. It is facilitated by an ultra-connected world, and it's not without its problem, but it allows social movement to grow and coordinate horizontally without being framed by institutions. Is it the same thing for the private sector, Jessica?
Yeah, I think the private sector really can be a real driving force of the integration of disabled people as well as refugees, and a promoter of gender equality in the workplace. I think one of the best ways to help reduce inequality and promote inclusion is to implement a CSR strategy in all of the companies. However, to be effective, this strategy must be applied in all of the company, in all the decisions, and all of the employees must be involved. And it can be hard to make it happening than it seems. For the past 2 years, I've been working as head of the CSR strategy of Up and Charge, which is a French startup selling a wireless charging system for electrical vehicles. And what I've come to realize is that as a startup, it's particularly difficult to establish a foothold in a market and to surround yourself with partners who all share the same social and environmental ambitions. One must make concessions in the beginning to exist, and then once established, you can afford to make choices that are more costly for the company but more ethical. So there is hope that one day it will be the opposite, to establish a company that will have to show, previous to anything else, its commitment to the security and to sustainability of people and of the planet. The United Nations Global Compact, which aims to get businesses and firms worldwide to adopt sustainable and socially responsible policies and to report on their implementation, today includes more than 9,500 companies in over 160 countries. So maybe one day, every company in the world will sign this pact and work together for a better world. I hope.
And these companies are signing up for the best labor practices, for the best implementation of human rights for all. So thank you for raising that. Let's see the key role of the international community and international cooperation. We start off with Victoria, where that hope lies.
So it's interesting because we all have very different hopes, but as a real believer in justice and law, I really think that the hope lies in the need for regulation and international cooperation, and this is impossible without a tight-knit international community, including a vigilant civil society. The UN has done unbelievable work to create the International Criminal Court and also all of the international criminal tribunals, such as for Rwanda and the former Yugoslavia, and we need to pursue the same goal for Ukraine and other concerned states. I'm personally doing my research analysis on the crime of genocide and Afghanistan issues, and for an example, I really think that we should consider including a gender consideration into the crime of genocide definition of the Rome Statute. That's just one example. I think that we really need this international law and cooperation. However, we must update those institutions and instruments to the actual configuration of both lingering and newly evolving conflicts. The second issue is reconciliation between the people and people themselves, within states and between states. I sincerely believe in transitional justice and reconciliation. If not, anger will remain and conflicts will continue to flare.
It's interesting to note that you mentioned the International Criminal Court in the same speech that you talk about vigilant civil society. If not for civil society, the International Criminal Court would not have been established. And I was glad I was there. I was previously discussing with you. So thank you very much for that. Chloe, Where do we go from there?
Thank you, Levi, and thank you, Victoria, for your intervention. So concerning my hopes regarding institution, we know that certain institutions have already made faster decisions, in some cases, mostly important ones. For example, the European Commission presented its legislative proposal for a ban on single-use plastic in May 2018. In the European Parliament approved the proposal in March 2019. So after negotiations, provisional agreement was reached between EU institutions in December 2019, and the directive was formally adopted in January 2020. It came into force on 2021. The speed of this adoption reflects the recognition of the urgency of plastic pollution in the ocean and the political will to act quickly. I'm hopeful that these institutions are evolving and adapting measures to be resilient to climate change consequences.
I don't know if I discussed this with you, the difference between political will and political courage. This is one particular contribution to the conversation. There's political will by people to sustain the planet. What is lacking is political courage by politicians to listen to the voice of the people. That's basically what democracy is. Political will resides in and among the people. What politicians need to exhibit is courage and wisdom to act on what the people are saying. You're not wrong. I'm simply saying that we need to pair political will with political courage and political wisdom. Courage and wisdom are lacking among our politicians, and we need the people to give it even a bigger push. Alice is back on this paradigm.
Thank you, Levi. My hope is rekindled when I notice that more and more people around the world are seeking to break free from this Western liberal vision. We, the young generations, want more and more to deconstruct these obsolete narratives and envisage new relationships with nature for a regenerative world. So more and more of us feel the need, the vital desire to reconnect deeply with the living world. It means that we want to feel that we belong to nature, not that nature belongs to us. And this is this elevation of consciousness that is a sign for me of a radical paradigm shift. And it's a promising change that can guarantee both planetary health and the well-being of future generations.
I like the idea of narratives. And what excites me about our conversation around this table is that you're challenging received notions, and therefore you are re-narrativizing this received notion. And I think the jaded ones of the UN, even the jaded leaders of civil society, need to listen to the plea for re-narrativization. Cyprien.
Yep. Yeah, my hopes and fears, I think, resonate quite a lot with Alice's ones. And I would say especially my hopes nowadays come a lot from the people on the field. Actually, those people who decided to fight and stand for a different life and world, using head, heart and hands to make the change happen. These are the people who are aware that our ecological system and institutions of governance may eventually fail or even collapse. But still, they're fighting because there is a meaning in this international and intergenerational struggle for human dignity and for human rights, and for peace and security, and for solidarity and sustainability. They show that positive and alternative futures linked with the narrative that you mentioned are possible, where people can thrive aside from the madness of our unsustainable world and of our unsustainable production and consumption patterns. When I see this, I have hope because achieving them is possible.
The ideas you propounded are not outrageous, but it drives me positively mad. Is that what you meant by madness here?
Yeah, well,
and so thank you very much for in such a short while, in such a few minutes, you were able to traverse the entirety of the burden of the entire webinar, which is to look at gender justice, to look at youth concerns from an inter and intragenerational perspective. the solidarity that I think will be generated by the conversation with the young people in the audience hearing the conversation, I can already feel is enormous. Now, you did not necessarily address the documents on our common agenda, Summit of the Future, but I hope that the United Nations officials and the governments participating in this webinar intently listened to the re-narrativization of the agenda before the UN, because they strike deeply into the common agenda of the Secretary General. It strikes deeply into the vision of the Secretary General for a youth envoy to permeate the governance structures of the United Nations, and for a Summit of the Future to not only deal with the historic inequalities of the past, but an assurance of the human rights of those yet to be born and those who are already acting upon the issues of the world, like these young professionals that I presented before you. Thank you very much for the freshness of ideas. Go and pursue those ideas and make them happen. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Well, the usually talkative Levy was far more silent than usual. What with the ideas brimming from the conversation with these young people, the width and the breadth of expertise, professional and on-the-ground expertise of these young people tell me that they are bearers of wisdom, not our usual understanding that as you age, you accumulate wisdom. The wisdom that these young people already exhibited is needed wisdom that needs action and implementation. We have, I believe in the audience, we have Chloe, we have Alice Fouyus, who else is online? We have Chloe and others in the conversation have joined us, and they will be listening and monitoring if you have questions. We do have two young people who will make interventions live, and we have Angelica Tostes de Brazil. Come in, Angelica.
Thank you. Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone, every part of the world where you are. I'm Angelica Tostes, a feminist theologian and member of the student Christian movement in Brazil. I appreciate the opportunity to be here in this space and contribute to the reflections from Brazil and Latin America. In the midst of the fear, I want to bring to the mind what brings me hope, as the biblical text of Lamentation would say. In this regard, I invite you to delve into the deep waters of Afro-Indigenous traditions of Abya Yala. The indigenous people teach us that the waters, the mountain, the plants are our siblings, not something separate from us. They carry with them the memories of the people. The waters, the mountain, the plants are also part of their ancestry. Just as the people of Afro-diasporic religions that enchanted us with the devotion to ancestry, the respect for the elders, and this beautiful relationship of actively listening through the body in deeds. Thus, I understand that intergenerational dialogue is essential for transformation of the future we seek, the ancestry of those who came before us, who paved the way for us to walk and even to transcend their limits. I could not speak about gender justice without mentioning my own territory, Brazil. My theology and my activism is grounded in my body, which is why indigenous women from Abya Yala have been advocating for some concept of body territory. This body territory in the global south is marked by injustice of gender, race, class, coloniality, sexuality, and caste that affects women's body. However, it's also a body territory in struggle, in resistance, striving to survive and live lives with these dreams and imagination. In our common agenda, two topics catch my attention: protect our planet and place women and girls at the center. These two aspects might seem distant from each other, but they are closer than we imagine. For this body territory also suffers from eco-injustice. The climate agenda radically impacts the survival of numbers of women who rely on land and harvests to live. If the countryside doesn't plan, the city doesn't die, is a motto of Landless rural workers movement, which underscores the importance of family farming in supplying cities with the production of health and sustainable foods. The report of Social Panorama of Latin America and Caribbean 2022 reveals that 1/3 of the population in the region lives in poverty, which also affects 45% of all teenagers and children. As in previous years, reports highlight that poverty is more prevalent for women aged 20 to 59, and also considerably higher among the indigenous and Afro-descendant population. And here in Brazil, the LGBTQ+ community suffers from financial and social instability. Hunger has a gender, color, ethnicity. Gender justice in the future of generations will be impossible without confronting the harms of neoliberalism inflicts on the lands of our world, exploiting them violently, just as they have always done with the bodies of women in the global south. The reclamation of this body territory is for the pursuit of the memories of the future, memories nurtured in the wombs and the hearts of the women of Nuestra America and the entire global south, who have fought and continue to fight against hunger, oppressions of the lands and bodies, and the exploitation of both themselves and their territory, the mountains, the waters, and the plains. I return to the biblical text of Lamentations. I bring to the memory what gives me hope. And for me, hope resides in women, girls, young women, adult women, elders women, always in women. To them, I honor the lineage of women who paved the way for me to be here today speaking to you all. Thank you.
Another youthful wisdom shared on screen and online. Muito obrigado, Angelica Tostes. We now bring another live intervention in this panel, Pauline Masiljalin Ambang, a young communications and campaign coordinator of the Women's International League for Peace and Freedom, coming to us in the heart of Africa, Cameroon. Pauline.
Good morning. I would say so much sweet greetings to everyone and everywhere you are. It's such a great pleasure for me to be on this special panel for this special opportunity. Concerning these special issues is really critical for you. Is really important to address this question about the source of our fear today and our hopes for the future. You know, it is important to note that young people are the majority of the population of many countries are affected by armed conflict. By the mid-2022, too much displaced people, of whom we can count in majority 74% of young people have been displaced, are host in a low or middle income countries. But this is the report of the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees. Therefore, young people are also severely influenced by conflict and economic and political crisis. Youth play many roles during conflict as civilian, combatant, and pacemakers. In addition, youth suffer of number of human rights violences. In education is disrupted, access to healthcare is limited, and access to job and opportunity of all of this has a long-term impact on peace and security. So the UN Council Resolution 2050 on youth, peace and security urge members to consider ways to increase inclusive representation of youth in the decision making and at the levels in the local, national, regional, and international institute, and mechanism for the prevention of resolution conflicts. So regarding our serious fear, we need to discuss about armed conflict. Our prior fear is the marginalization, the disconnection from the society development and the politics due our age. Looking at the global context in Africa in particular, older people are considered to be the holders of universal wisdom, and young people, even if have an important contribution to make, they are even not taking account at all. These are promising space to discuss their perspective within the community is really frustrating. And we can also see the force into militarized masculinities, and it is really complicated for mostly young boys who are forced to integrate militias or armed groups. And then we can talk about the extremism of gender violence, based violence on women and girls internally displaced that are forced to sexual abuse because their husband have refused to integrate that armies and group arms. So now rape is used as armed conflict, and it's a really worrying situation. And then we can see that there is an urgent need to talk about the consequence of armed conflict on the biopsychosocial, for example, on the development of youth people for the future. Therefore, there is now an hostile economic and professional environment in which there is neither access to job nor opportunities. Our fear also concerns young people forced into irregular immigration, and the worst, we are scared about the multitude of wars and conflict in the world, impacting, for example, the indigenous youth sending away from their local lands. It's true that the current geopolitical context may give sin for young people to share the concern about their preoccupations, but youth should be part of the war process, not just as consultation, but all partners. So what we expect on our hopes for the future, looking at the issue of the cooperation involved by multilateralism, we need to prioritize justice and youth perspective, and a youth perspective, intergenerational justice. We jump into diversity and the inclusion, where there is a huge need to design seats specifically for youth on the table of decision. We want that the policies should be shaped for youth social inclusion and right base. We need that the fund should be mobilized, funding should be mobilized for universal social protection for the most vulnerable. Instead, for instance, girls' protection of sexual and reproductive health and rights. This will ensure is psychosocial support to survival of gender-based violence. That is really important to address the root causes. We hope that there should be a promotion of youth employment, opportunities and vocational training, fostering their education, promoting your youth entrepreneurship and constructive engagement for the future. Then, for what the Young Youth Network is doing to shape the agenda for the movement for reimagining the multilateralism, the Young Youth Network provides with the active and enormous, that is important to note, the active and the enormous support of the board, a space to organize an advanced goal of youth within the younger generation, especially as with youth. We do not just mean children, but also people around 18 and 13, even 35. Our youth peace and work for gender justice is combined with wider commitment to peace. This includes disarmament and demilitarizations, as the new agenda for peace calls on members to commit to reducing human cost of weapons by moving away from overly secularized and militarized approaches to peace, to human well-being resources. As young people are the present and the future, it's a crucial opportunity to discuss what future could look like. The principle, nothing about us without us, reminds the need our common agenda to spotlight the energies and engage the co-drafting of the policies and the affect actually your lives. We are already the leaders now, and we be must recognized as such. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Pauline. Merci beaucoup. Thanks for covering. Thanks for covering a wide range of issues that cover your fears and your hopes, and a perspective, especially coming from Africa, is important. But that is not to regionalize your thought and your view, because your thoughts are as local and as global as you presented them. So thank you very much. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope that you, like me, am in awe and appreciation of all the young people's presentation, both those in the round table earlier and Angelica's and Pauline's. I want to make sure that the intentional listener and intentional note taker for this panel is Dr. Kangwa Mabuluki, who is the General Secretary of the All Africa Theological Education by Extension Association and a former co-general secretary of the World Student Christian Federation. I am myself a senior friend. That means an old person who was formerly a member of a student Christian movement in the Philippines, of which the global organization is called the WSCF, and WSCF is a full member of CoNGO, and we very much appreciate that. Just a few quick notes. Again, the Q&R code there, so you can do the messaging to government, civil society, and all the leaders who need to hear what we're saying. Number two, I want to repeat what I said in chat. The CoNGO leaders will review the chat because of the great messages that are coming and being exchanged back and forth by participants. We will review what you're saying. I want us to give another round of applause to all our young professional interventions. Thank you very much. Let's now go to panel number 3, and I'd like to introduce to you our moderator for panel 3. That's Dr. Ana Maria Suarez Franco, FIAN International, with food and nutrition issues, is a full member of CoNGO as well. FIAN International is based in Geneva, and so Ana Maria comes to us from Colombia by way of Switzerland, where she is based. Ana Maria, you have panel 3 to moderate.
Hello, good morning in New York, good afternoon in other parts of the world. My name, as said, is Ana Maria Suarez Franco, and I will moderate panel number 3, which is on intra and intergenerational justice and solidarity for future generations. I want to begin thanking CoNGO for organizing this very important panel, especially on view of the Summit of the Future and many other relevant processes that are thinking on what are we going to let to the future generations, including also the consultative opinions that the International Court of Justice and the Inter-American Human Rights Court are now discussing and will issue in hopefully in some months. I also want to thank to Susan Sepperson. Susan will be the rapporteur of this panel, and she is the vice chair of the NGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity, Generations United USA. Remembering why are we speaking about these issues? It's not a secret for anybody that already in the 70s and before, many were concerned about how we were depleting our nature and we were living a model of life that is not sustainable, healthy, or fair. But these threats have multiplied, and this includes the unsustainable patterns of production, global health threats and pandemics, also the inadequately regulated and controlled new technologies like the artificial intelligence. We also have wars, more than 110 armed conflicts in the world, where weapons of mass destruction may be used. Those are still produced, of course. And we also have the erosion of norms of democratic governance beyond all the planetary environmental crisis, intoxication, climate change, and the loss of biodiversity. And this means that our generation is threatening the ability of future generations to enjoy their recognized human rights while they are voiceless and unrepresented mostly in decision making. That's why many processes have begun, including the process towards the recognition of the principles on the human rights of future generations, on which our first speaker will introduce us. But I want to remember that in these and other processes, social movements have some concerns when we speak about the human rights of future generations, including what does it mean to refer to future generations? Does it mean that we accept injustice in the present? Or does it mean that we do not recognize that in current and future generations, we can have intragenerational injustice, inequity? Or does it mean that we can control the reproductive rights of women to ensure rights in the future? All those are big problems, and therefore our panel now is focusing on solidarity with future generations, putting the emphasis in three aspects. First, how to frame them on human rights. Second, how to ensure that these are in line with the principles of intra and intergenerational justice. And last but not least, also how to protect gender justice and women's rights in all this debate. And now I would like to pass the floor to our first speaker, Professor Sandra Liebenberg, who is a distinguished professor and H.F. Oppenheimer Chair in Human Rights Law at the Stellenbosch University in South Africa, also one of the drafters of the Maastricht Principles on the Human Rights of Future Generations. And Professor Liebenberg will tell us how these main questions of inter, and gender justice are reflected in the Maastricht Principles. Sandy, you are very welcome. I'm happy to see you speaking to us from South Africa. You have now 8 minutes, and we are very grateful for having your intervention.
So good afternoon, everyone from South Africa. It's an enormous honor to be part of this panel and to share in the celebration of this third CoNGO Global Thematic webinar. So as Anna Maria said, I'm going to focus on the newly adopted Maastricht Principles on the human rights of future generations, in which I participated as chair of the drafting group. Anna Maria was part of the steering group, and they were adopted in February this year after an extensive process of research, consultation, and outreach with a very wide variety of stakeholders. So I'm going to turn then to the first theme, namely framing future generations as holders of international human rights. And I think this is one of the most important contributions of the Maastricht Principles, because unfortunately one does see a tendency in some of the recently produced documents, such as the draft elements paper on the Declaration for Future Generations, and even surprisingly in the newly adopted general comment of the Committee on the Rights of the Child on children and the environment, to refer to the interests of future generations. Now, I'll explain in a moment why it's important to speak about the human rights of future generations. But I start first with outlining why the justification for referring to future generations as human rights holders. And here we refer to the body of international human rights law, which as a fundamental principle refers to the universality of human rights without restrictions as to space, but also in time. The idea that human rights are founded on the equality and equal dignity of all of humanity, and that all generations should be able to assert and claim their human rights. We also draw on a large body of international law in the field of sustainable development, environment law, which refers to obligations to future generations and obligations of intergenerational equity to build our approach of obligations to future generations. And then lastly, the drafters of the principles drew inspiration from the values, the customs and norms of diverse religious and belief systems across the globe that increasingly recognize and historically have also recognized obligations to future generations. And in this regard, it's been particularly important to draw on the worldviews and beliefs of indigenous peoples across the world that recognize this continuum of obligations between past, present, and future. Now, why it is important to recognize future generations as rights holders is that unlike interests, it actually then generates concrete obligations for states, business entities, intergovernmental organizations to respect, protect, and fulfill the human rights of future generations. And this is elaborated in the Maastricht Principles, where we give many examples of what would constitute violations of the human rights of future generations. So, for example, failing to anticipate and put in place systems to prevent threats to the human rights of future generations. The duty to protect and rehabilitate natural ecosystems, allocating resources to ensure the full and equal enjoyment of human rights by future generations, and establishing national, regional, and global institutions to represent future generations in fora where decision-making could impact on their human rights. And I think very importantly, it includes the rights of future generations to access to justice, to be able to defend their rights through the legal system, nationally, regionally, and globally, and for courts and international bodies increasingly to recognize the standing of future generations and their representatives to protect their interests, their human rights through these legal bodies. Secondly, I turn to the interrelationship between intra and intergenerational human rights obligations. So the Maastricht Principles is very strong in recognizing that there is a close interlinkage between past, present, and future patterns of human rights violations, and that historical human rights violations generate deep patterns of disadvantage and systemic human rights violations which transmit across generations. So the descendants of groups that have suffered historical and current human rights violations are much more vulnerable to those violations in the future. And thus the Maastricht Principles require states to take special measures to prioritize these groups and to ensure that particularly groups and communities that have suffered the legacies of slavery, colonialism, racism, and patriarchy are prioritized in measures to protect and safeguard the human rights of future generations. The principles also inevitably recognize that there would need to be reasonable restrictions on activities and use of natural resources by current generations in order to safeguard the natural world and natural resources for the benefits of future generations. But here we also refer to the seminal work of Edith Brown Weiss, who notes that too often long-term costs are accrued for short-term benefits, which often only go to a few. And so the principles, the Maastricht Principles, recognize that policies that impose restrictions on resource allocations and use must be aimed at rectifying the great inequalities in control over resources within the current generations, and which leave disadvantaged communities with very few access to resources and benefits. So the restrictions should be borne by those groups and those states who are most able to bear those burdens, and disproportionate burdens should not be placed on already disadvantaged groups and countries, particularly in the global south. And then lastly, just the point that Anna Maria mentioned, and perhaps in questions I could come back to my fourth point on youth, but I just want to touch on the issue of gender equality in the principles. Because again, the principles recognize that deeply entrenched social and cultural stereotypes and norms perpetuate gender inequality across generations. And this has profound effects for the ability of future girls, women, and gender diverse persons to enjoy their human rights in future. And so the principles require the elimination of all forms of direct and indirect discrimination, including on grounds of sex, gender, sexual orientation, gender identity, marital and family status. And then my final comment is in relation to the point that Anna Maria raised, the potential misuse of the recognition of future generations' human rights to undermine the reproductive rights and autonomy of women, girls, and other persons who can become pregnant. And so the Maastricht Principles includes a strong interpretive principles to say that nothing in these principles recognizes any rights of human embryos or fetuses to be born, nor does it recognize any obligation on any individual to give birth to another. And nothing in these principles should be construed as accepting any interference with the bodily autonomy of women, girls, and others who can become pregnant, including their actions and decisions around pregnancy, abortion, and other sexual and reproductive health rights. So I hope with those brief comments, I've given you an indication of how the Maastricht Principles responds to the 3 points that you outlined. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Sandy, for this very quick but concise and clear presentation of the principles. I want to take 3 main messages from your presentation. First is that we can not only think on solidarity with future generations, but we need and are obliged, states are obliged to phrase them in the human rights framework. And interestingly, in the principles, we have very clear examples of violations on how could happen that states are not complying with these obligations. The second is we cannot have justice in the future if we do not get justice and equity in the present, and therefore future generations or what we do for them, it doesn't mean that we ignore the injustice in our current times. And last but not least, it is impossible to achieve the rights of future generations without gender justice in the present. So thank you very much for these presentations. I would then go to our next panelist, who will present the youth perspective. This is Ms. Lucy Plummer. Lucy is a youth engagement consultant and practitioner, social and environmental issues and UN affairs at Soka Gakkai International in the United Kingdom. And Lucy, to not take much time from you, please just go ahead. We are very happy to have young women here in our panel.
Thank you so much, Anna. I just wanted to say congratulations to CoNGO on this 75th anniversary, and thank you so much for this opportunity to share some thoughts on this wonderful panel today. So I'm going to be focusing on 3 points of youth and human rights, youth and intergenerational solidarity, and youth and gender justice. So when I was reflecting on this topic, I wrote my points based on a vision of a just, equitable, thriving planet for all, and upon considering what actions and principles we should be taking in the present in order to get there. So my first 3 points relate to youth and human rights. And point number 1 relates to the unique position that children and young people occupy in policy. So today's children and young people are part of the current, present living generation, but they will also be living through today's major policy windows, including 2030, which is the international target for achieving the SDGs, and 2050, which is the national target of many countries to achieve carbon neutrality. So due to this unique positioning for policy, it can be argued that while very much being present generation, children and young people can also be considered members of future generations and therefore representative of the needs and interests of future generations. Subsequently, the views, perspectives, and experiences of children and young people must be a key consideration for decision-making and policy-making processes, since they are the only group in society to hold this unique position. I would like to see decision makers and policy makers recognize the unique position that children and young people hold and gain special recognition as future emissaries, that being persons with a special mission to be representatives of the future within the policy space. My point number 2 touches on the fact of children and young people having less rights in political processes. And the current status of young people in political decision-making is below the standards of human rights as outlined in the UN Declaration on Human Rights and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child. And this is the same for the major developed nations as well as the most developing nations. Part of the issue is, and this has been written on extensively by scholars on youth, is that there is a tendency to see children and young people as not yet full citizens and therefore not deserving of the full rights of citizens. For example, children, persons under 18, do not have the right to vote in the majority of places. And for example, this tendency to regard youth as not yet full citizens in particular is particularly damaging for those young people aged between 18 to 26, who mostly do have the right to vote and participate in political processes, and yet are often denied these rights and denied a say in important matters affecting their lives. And we can see this as a big problem in the case of climate policies. Now, it's clear by the way of the multitude of child and youth-led climate advocacy taking place in countries all across the world that young people feel very passionately about the problem of climate change and want to be included in the solutions. Yet, despite their high volume at international conferences, children and young people remain excluded from decision-making processes regarding climate change and have had to come up with creative tactics of policy advocacy. And this is in spite of children and young people having an official constituency group in the UN Climate Convention, which is CoNGO since 2009. The situation that young people find themselves in shows that we have not yet fully achieved human rights for children and young people as outlined in the Declaration on Human Rights and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. So actualizing the rights of children and young people requires us to confront age-based prejudices against children and young people around their capacity to speak on behalf of their generation's experiences and have a say in important decisions. And my third point relating to human rights is on the importance of viewing young people as experts in the experience of being a young person and not as policy experts. So while some youth can certainly be recognized as policy experts in their own rights, the majority of children and young people are not, nor should they be. It is intimidating enough for most young people to step into the political arena, where oftentimes they are made to feel that they are not welcome or have no right in being there or have nothing to contribute to the discussion. Young people tend to be at the forefront of trends and major changes as they undergo the challenges of finding jobs, living arrangements, a partner, friends, figuring out all the stuff that the adults already have sorted out. And therefore their experiences are really invaluable for understanding not only the present, but where we are headed as a society. Therefore, children and young people should not be judged by their ability to be policy experts, but instead be acknowledged and respected as experts in living, navigating, and experiencing the daily realities of modern society and such insights that are critical for good policy. So next, I would just like to make one point on youth and intragenerational solidarity. So a youthful spirit is not defined by one's age. Intergenerational and intragenerational solidarity is essential for progress on any kind. It is a popular fallacy among the younger generation that only young people care about the future, and it is an absurdity to claim that young people are ignorant are ignorant about important matters or disinterested in politics. We must each confront and challenge age-based prejudice and prejudices of all kinds, and strengthen solidarity between all generations. And I feel that one way to do that is to redefine youth and consider what it means to live with a youthful spirit. The American businessman, humanitarian, and religious leader Samuel Ullman once wrote on the subject of youth, I quote, "Youth is not a time of life, it is a state of mind. It is a matter of the will, a quality of imagination, a vigor of emotions. It is the freshness of the deep springs of life. Nobody grows old by merely a number of years. We grow old by deserting our ideals, unquote. In this thinking, my point is that intergenerational and intragenerational solidarity should be based on this youthful spirit, and it is the challenge of each one of us, no matter our age, to maintain this spirit of youth, as Ullman articulates it, and to base our solidarity with one another on our courage, our high ideals, and our hunger for justice. Lastly, I would like to touch on the point of gender justice. We know that young people are underrepresented in politics, but for young women, the issue is much deeper and extends far beyond the realm of politics to all levels of society. In many cases, girls and young women and women are actively and intentionally denied the same rights as other genders in the home, at school, in the workplace, in hospitals, basically in every realm of society. Even though there has been a lot of progress made on gender equality, the empowerment of women and girls is mostly overlooked. And in my work as a youth engagement coordinator, I consistently meet young women who are lacking confidence, possessing low self-esteem, and have been conditioned to view themselves as lacking in some way and having an externalized sense of self-worth. This means that young women often don't put themselves forward for opportunities and can compromise on their own basic human needs out of fear of repercussions. Therefore, taking a proactive stance towards empowering young women and girls to follow their dreams is a really important endeavor for all of us. When young women and girls are sincerely praised just as they are and receive personal encouragement from older generations of women in particular, but also men and their peers, it can completely change the trajectory of their lives, because we often need someone to tell us how amazing and capable we are. So that's my final point, and I'd like to end my remarks there, and thank you again for this great opportunity.
Thank you very much, Lucy, for this great presentation. I think you were very strong, and I would like to highlight also some ideas. The first is that we really need to recognize the unique position of children and youth as representatives of the future. I think this is also included in the Maastricht Principles on the rights of future generations. Also, the relevance of the full participation of children and youth as experts on their situations. And I am sure that in many issues, you have more clarity as adults because you are thinking on how your life will look like. And I also think that it was very moving when you said that in the intra and intergenerational solidarity, that they are essential for progress, but also that we grow old when we desert our ideas. And I think in the youth movement, I have seen that these ideas on thinking on nature and on the future are always embedded on an idea of justice. And we should not give up that justice should be over profit, for example. And no doubt intergenerational justice, intersectional discrimination is a problem, and therefore a special way to ensure that women, children and girls are part of the decisions for the future is key, and affirmative measures are needed on this. So thank you, Lucy, for that. Susanne Sepperson, please, if you have any question for our two panelists, please go ahead.
So I was going to send these notes to Dr. Ritchie, and I still will, but I would say that as it relates to this and most other things, the goals are extremely laudable. How are you going to implement them? And particularly we have a carrots and sticks approach here. How are we going to implement them?
And may I add, Ana Maria, from the Q&A section, here's a very particular question to Sandy. Professor Liebenberg, where is coverage of discrimination by age? The fastest growing mega trend is population aging of our globe, and World Health Organization has documented that one half of the global population hold ageist attitudes. Where is that in the Maastricht principles?
Thank you very much, Susan and Liberato. I would then give the floor to our two panelists and then say a goodbye word. Sandy, you have 2 minutes.
Thanks so much for those great questions. And I'm sorry also I didn't get time to get to where the principles deal with the youth and children aspect, because, you know, they very strongly recognize children and youth as the closest in proximity to unborn future generations, and also as having an enormous stake in human rights protection, both for themselves as children in the here and now, but also in the course of their lifetime as adults. And so the Maastricht Principles really recognize a particular role for children and youth, and call for their representation in all decisions of decision-making fora, and their special right and status as representatives on behalf of themselves, but also unborn future generations. And then just to answer the question on implementation, yes, indeed, the Maastricht Principles are not, of course, binding law as yet. It is part of a civil society academic coalition product, but we hope through various initiatives, a large stakeholder engagement to bring momentum to advocate and mobilize for these principles, including in relation to the Summit of the Future, the declaration that having a particular human rights focus, not simply an interest focus. We are already doing work with the treaty bodies, with national institutions, and also with the climate change cases before the ICJ and the Inter-American Court that Ana Maria mentioned, to get these principles recognized and increasingly entrenched in a legal format and in policy. So it's a mobilizing document. It's also based on very solid legal research. So we're preparing a legal commentary at the moment to the principles, which we hope will be a resource to all of those interested in advocating for youth and future generations' human rights. And then just the question on where is age discrimination in the principles and in relation to the ageist views. So the precise answer there is in principle 6B, where we recognize also the obligation to eliminate all forms of discrimination on the basis of age. And I think very much I would endorse what Lucy Plummer said, that, you know, and it came out also earlier in the discussions, that we need to build intra-generational solidarity. We need to learn from each other. I think many indigenous peoples' worldviews, veneration of older people and their wisdom, the transmitters of culture and beliefs from current to future generations. And I think many traditional Western liberal systems that sort of discard older people when they no longer have market value and so forth is very much at odds with the ethos and the spirit of the Maastricht Principles. So I think this intra-generational solidarity and justice is embedded in the Maastricht Principles. Thank you.
Thank you, Sandy. Directly to you, Lucy. Do you have any final remarks?
I do, yeah, thank you. I would like to maybe respond to Suzanne's point about how do we implement this. I would say human rights education is key. And I would say that the root of all these problems is our collective failure to consider human rights and dignity as the central and utmost priority and goal in all fields of endeavor. So human rights education, particularly with young people, is really crucial so that, you know, these the values and norms expressed in the Declaration of Human Rights are really rooted in people's lives, particularly young people. And it's, you know, through human rights education, individuals become aware of human rights and empowered to uphold their own rights and protect the rights of others. And it's a concrete, lifelong process through which a culture of human rights is fostered at the grassroots, with the respect for the dignity of individuals at the center. And I'd also just like to point out how it's really important to use international human rights instruments that have been created for, with, and by marginalized groups. So the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities and the UN Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous Peoples are really crucial for self-determination and really must be recognized and upheld when working with specific marginalized groups on the implementation of their rights. So
thank you very much, Lucy. Great women's panel. And I would like just to say that while Sandy was speaking of what we are doing at the international level, already national examples are beginning. Some months ago, we had a hearing in the Colombian parliament to see how to apply the principles on the human rights of future generations to a new mining law. And some communities are beginning to think how to incorporate this in their case analysis, human rights analysis, and advocacy work. So this is promising, and the tool is for every one of you. If you want to understand something better, you can connect to us through Liberato. We are happy to discuss. So we have immediate future tasks to ensure that the future is also fair with everyone. And with these words, I want to finish thanking every one of you, and yeah, hoping that every one of us takes this work as part of their work, of their life, and we can let a better world for the youth, for the children, or for us coming up. Thank you very much. Goodbye.
Ana Maria, Sandra, Lucy, thank you very much for a lively panel. To honor what I said earlier, I think I need to field one question to panel one, and I think we will only need one response in the interest of time. We're about 7 minutes back delayed, and I'll honor it first. I'll read it in so that you don't have to switch. I'll read it first in Spanish because it was raised as a question in Spanish. Buenos días. México tiene un grave problema que violenta los derechos humanos de las mujeres, niñas y niños. Es la trata de personas con fines de explotación sexual, especialmente en las zonas turísticas. ¿Cómo poder solucionar este grave problema? Gracias. So that was the original question, which means Mexico has a serious problem that violates the human rights of women and children. It is the trafficking of persons for sexual exploitation, especially in tourist areas. How can we solve this serious problem? Anyone in panel one? Trafficking in humans, and especially trafficking in sex. Is someone talking but not unmuted? Well, we cannot afford to lose more time, so we'll get that question posed to our panelists, and we'll get that responded some other way. I know that our lead rapporteur is waiting to present to us some of the highlights of this presentation, but I'll give him another minute to consolidate the thoughts and notes that were submitted to him by the rapporteurs. And again, thank you, Myra Cohen. Thank you, Dr. Kangwa Mabuluki, and thank you, Dr. Susan Sepperson, for being the intentional listeners and note takers. And I hope that you have sent some of your notes to our CoNGO First Vice President Cyril Ritchie. Just a few seconds longer. I am so pleased to see attending our webinar, our co-leaders in CoNGO. I want to acknowledge the presence of Dr. Martina Gredler, Surreptimus International, who is our second vice president based in Vienna. I want to also acknowledge the presence of Mondia Bangsba, our vice president at large for CoNGO. She is the international president of the Pan-Pacific Southeast Asia Women's Organization. God bless you, Mondia. This is early morning in Bangkok, and you are with us. And even better, ladies and gentlemen, on this, joining us the whole time is Edith Ballantyne, the former president of CoNGO and the former president of Women's International League for Peace and Freedom. Edith Ballantyne, here's an advanced happy birthday on December 10. I know you will be turning 101 and still attending our webinar today. So ladies and gentlemen, let me now turn over to Mr. Cyril Ritchie to give us a raw report from what our rapporteurs heard, and it will be the basis of an outcome document which you will all receive.
Thank you once again, Levi, for allocating me this impossible task. This third webinar in the series of 6 that CoNGO is organizing during its 75th anniversary year has once again been a great success.
Cyril, can you get a little back so we can see a little bit profile of yours? Still, yeah, that would be, yeah.
All right. I was trying to read my paper. So let me repeat, this webinar has again been a great success, thanks to the intense planning work carried out by CoNGO President Liberato Bautista and his team. I hope you will have noticed that in the chat box, there were many compliments to Liberato for the work involved. This webinar, again, had a highly competent set of speakers and moderators. And as far as I saw from the listing, at least 160 participants, maybe more. As this present summary is very limited in time, I, of course, can only give a number of the highlights brought forward, which are for future examination and implementation. The webinar report will, of course, enter into much more detail and with more complete inputs from the respective panel rapporteurs. So here in very succinct form are just some of today's highlights. On the themes of gender justice, youth, inter and intergenerational justice and solidarity for future generations. And I was happy that it was underlined from the beginning that this webinar and all our webinars are a contribution to the SDG Summit this year and the Summit of the Future next year, and to implementing the Secretary General's Our Common Agenda. It was said, and how true it is, wars are the greatest threat to present and future generations. Wars sideline gender justice. Wars sideline the hopes of our children and young people. Human security and sustainability are at stake every day that we have wars on our planet. As the President reminded us, CoNGO has a slogan for this year, defining the present, shaping the future, and making the change now. And I believe that we have made some advances by the remarkable presentations today. The world, said the President, has a surplus of fear and a deficit of hope. Some of the highlights I quote were, let's not forget the words of the UN Secretary General on climate change. We're no longer talking about global warming. We're talking about global boiling. Every speaker in some way or another has underlined that human rights are central to all the aspirations for and by future generations. It has been asked today, have we already crossed the point of no return in the climate area, in the war area, because we're not able to prevent wars and stop them when they are underway. We are indeed, as one speaker said, experiencing a crisis of civilization. And as others said, and more than once, global governance must be restored. Multilateral global governance must be restored as a matter of urgency. And in that, NGOs have a special role to play in persuading governments to take action, because our future is in the hands of the people. We have a couple of items that I put in high quotes. For example, in the chat box, one speaker said, one participant said to the speakers, and I pass that on to everyone, your statements and your passion encourage me and make me want to do more. Please take that personally for every one of you. Now, I could spend all my time in dealing with the youth video that we were shown, a wonderful example. Remember what was said, youth are not a challenge, they're an opportunity. And the African proverb that an elderly person seated can see further than a young person standing emphasizes the importance of intelligent mentorship. Let us recall the youth fears in brief: gender discrimination, racial discrimination, disagreements that turn to violence, ecological problems, including the oceans and climate, and the shortage of resources that itself leads to conflict. The inability, apparently, of governments to act rather than to just adopt declarations and words. The youth said we need fundamental changes and an ecological consciousness. And we need all of us, starting with governments, to respond to the evidence. Among the hopes that youth expressed were the need for better law, better international law, and its implementation. And in that, the role of the UN is crucial. Youth also looked forward to CSR being implemented in all companies, and particularly with the support of the mechanism of the UN Global Compact. Youth finally, I would say, reminded us of three wonderful quotes. Nothing about us without us, that we grow old only when we desert our ideals, and that we can and must have a youthful spirit. Underlying all these points, and I'm using up my time extremely rapidly, were the two remarks, again by Levi, on political will. Political will is demonstrated by NGOs, by the people, every day. It's political courage by politicians and governments that is lacking. Two more main points. Building peace requires a gender-sensitive approach. Gender justice is a fundamental precondition of achieving peace and security. And we need more evident global leadership for peace. Gender equality, after all, is a human right. And yet in some countries, women cannot own land, they cannot inherit patriarchy. They cannot inherit property. Patriarchy is ongoing and has to be overcome to achieve a feminist peace in which women are protected and have full rights. I end with, again, quotes from the chat. I cannot enter into the Mastery Principles and the Universal Declaration of Human Responsibilities, but obviously we all need to read them and to apply them. In the chat, it was said, we have heard many good ideas and good intentions, but to turn them into results is much more difficult. Well, that's what CoNGO is about every day, turning ideas into reality. And we are going to continue to help with that transformation on an ongoing basis. I turn the floor back to the President.
Thank you, Mr. First Vice President Cyril. You do make impossible tasks possible. And thank you for having a raw report from the bench, so to speak, as ideas came. The fourth webinar is next week, September 4. Go to the website of CoNGO. Registration is there. The registration is ongoing.
September 7. September 7, not 4.
September 7, I should say. And you will be pleased even to know that we have top-level United Nations speakers, government officials, and speakers are all from all over the continents. And there are more women, again, than men. And I would like to report to you in closing that between webinar 1 on March 2 and webinar 2 on June 5 and webinar 3 today and webinar 4 next week on September 7, I'm not ashamed to tell you, and in fact, I'm very proud that 57 speakers are women. That's the total of speakers. 37 are men, and youth speakers 15. 57 women, 37 men, 15 young people. I think that's worth noting. The planning committee of these webinars were very intentional in making sure that the demographic is such, more women, and then we've covered all of the Americas, North America, Latin America, Caribbean, with speakers from Pacific and Oceania, the Arab region, Africa, and all of that. You've seen that today, and I hope that you continue to help. We're looking for CoNGO member organizations to participate in the organization of the next webinars. Cyril Ritchie is leading also as we speak, webinar number 5, which will be about United Nations and NGO relations. How are we going to enhance multilateralism, protect NGO access at multilateral arenas, especially the United Nations, and how do we protect civic space and democratic discourse, knowing that these spaces are shrinking and democratic discourse is being threatened by means repressive and oppressive. So we invite you. And then the last webinar, which will be in December in Geneva, will be, as planned, a double celebration of the 75th anniversary of CoNGO and the 75th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. So look out in the calendar for December what that webinar 6 will be. But ladies and gentlemen, I'm also not bashful in saying that we bring this to you at some cost. And so I would like to name our co-sponsors at this point for our webinars who have contributed additional money for these activities: the Armenian Assembly of America, the Congressional Black Caucus Political Education and Leadership Institute, which is the NGO of the Congressional Black Caucus at the US Congress, my own organization, the organization that pays my work, the General Board of Church and Society of the United Methodist Church, the CoNGO Committee on Intergenerational Solidarity at the United Nations, COIGENS, Generations United, International Association of Applied Psychology, the Mulchand and Parpati Tadani Foundation, which is exceptional. They have given $50,000 toward the 75th anniversary celebration. The Fundación Internacional René May, based in Mexico, the Pan-Pacific and Southeast Asia Women's Association, and Staff United Fund. Thank you very much. The 4 more major events before the end of the year is seeking more co-sponsors, and we would be so appreciative. I also want to thank you all, the panelists, the moderators, the rapporteurs, and the participants. And Cyril, there are more than the number what you said, because what's showing in the chat does not include the panelists and the moderators who have another line of access. And then the viewers on YouTube. So we are potentially about a little over 200. And so between webinar 1 and webinar 3, we have already reached close to 2,000 participants. And we're very glad, we're very happy about that. Language interpreters, we cannot express our thanks to you so much. Yon Salinas, Abad Arabat, muchísimas gracias. Although Abad, you were doing French as well, together with Eloan Quignet, Etienne Devillet. Merci beaucoup, monsieur. Murad Mujahid, shukran. Thank you very much for doing Arabic. Linguistic diversity and linguistic justice, CoNGO is committed to it. And I hope you like that this webinar was brought to you in 4 languages. And to the CoNGO leadership, my heartfelt thanks. Cyril, Martina, Mondia, and the many other members of the Panpasiwa who are present here, and the members of the board. I cannot name you all, but I know Hiro Sakurai and others are on this webinar. It's been a long day, a long night, and I'm sure many others have been holding back their eyes from sleeping and ready to hit the bed, if not already. So thank you very much from the bottom of my heart and on behalf of CoNGO. Thank you. Merci beaucoup. Muchísimas gracias.